All right. Hello, everyone. Very important episode here today. We're going to be deep diving into sleep and melatonin specifically. This is a very underrated topic in the health industry. A lot of people touch on sleep, they mention it, they have a few paragraphs in their books about it, but very few people dive into the appropriate length to really understand how important proper sleep can be to your health and specifically what role melatonin plays in that. And I say it's underrated not just because it's not emphasized enough, which it isn't, but also because I think this is one of the biggest problems for people who are trying to get healthy. I know tons and tons of people who eat super clean. Some of them have their own goats and their own homestead and all this stuff. They go to extreme lengths and pay good money for good food. They buy our supplements, full supplement program. They go outside and get vitamin D and ground themselves to the earth. They do all this stuff, and yet they're on Instagram at 1 in the morning, staying up too late, exposing themselves to too much blue light, messing up their sleep. And some of these people are really struggling to optimize their health, their hormones, maybe even their disease condition. On paper, they're doing everything right. Except on paper, we're not talking enough about their sleep. So there's a very good chance that this episode applies directly to you. I'm guilty of this as well. I had very good sleep habits before I really got busy online. I do work online on the phone and on the computer. And I'm guilty, especially in the last year or so. I've been putting in extremely long hours, working too long, staying up too late, staring at the screen too long. And it absolutely affects my performance and my mental health especially. And this episode is focused on diving deep into the book, The Magic of Melatonin by Dr. Jan Dirk Foutek. Hope I said that correctly. And I know I called this episode The Melatonin Miracle, but that's actually a different book title. I just thought it was a way better name. This is going to be a very long episode. And for those of you listening on audio, you should know that I have been recording these episodes, most of them on video, and posting them to YouTube and Rumble as well. And for the video people, you can also listen to this on podcast, whatever is most convenient for you, especially on these long episodes. And of course, all episodes are released at least 1 week early on Patreon, sometimes several weeks early if I'm very on top of things. And either way, I appreciate your support. And with that being said, let's dive in. I rearranged this book a little bit. Normally, I just go through chronologically and read what I saved when I read these books. But this book jumped back and forth between some topics, so I put all the topics together. Very good book, by the way. I do recommend it. I'm not going to cover everything in it today. So to start off with, basics here. Melatonin is mainly produced in the pineal gland, but also the digestive system, mitochondria, and the retina, and maybe even other places in the body that haven't been discovered yet. And we're going to talk later about the digestive system, mitochondria, and retina. But you should know that the melatonin that is actually circulated in the blood is primarily produced in the pineal gland. And the movement into modern melatonin research came in 1958 by the dermatologist Aaron Lerner. With tests on amphibians, he wanted to investigate the hormone responsible for the bleaching factor of their skin. He was particularly interested in the pineal gland, which had hitherto encountered no great scientific interest in the dermatological field. After 4 long years of research, Lerner was able to make the breakthrough, and he named the hormone responsible for the skin bleaching, N-acetyl-5-methoxytryptamine, which he briefly referred to as melatonin, a word creation from the pigment melanin and the so-called happy hormone serotonin. And of course, we all now just refer to it as melatonin. And this all starts with tryptophan, an essential amino acid. Serotonin is formed from tryptophan, and then serotonin is transformed into melatonin during the night. While melatonin regulates our day-night rhythm and is mainly released during the night, serotonin is produced mainly during the day, especially during the morning. It improves our mood and increases our drive. In the short term, serotonin can also be increased with carbohydrates and sugars, which is why people eat so-called comfort food, right? Pasta or chocolate or something sugary, which causes insulin to be released in the body, which, in addition to the sugar utilization in our body, it also increases the uptake of protein building block tryptophan into the brain. So eating these carbohydrate and sugar comfort foods increases tryptophan into the brain, which is then converted into serotonin, and your mood improves. Serotonin is also released during physical activity, in addition to many other hormones that have a positive effect on your health. Serotonin acts as a messenger for some of our most important body functions, such as the regeneration of the liver and the pancreas, or blood coagulation, as well as our gastrointestinal activity. So we need it to regenerate cells and have good digestive health. Serotonin also controls the tension of our vessels and thus affects a migraine or heart problem. Many studies show that a relationship exists between serotonin deficiency and seasonal depression. And this book is very well cited, by the way. I'm not going to read you every reference, but I was happy to see that all the references were there in this book. If too little serotonin is produced, a snowball effect is established. In particular, melatonin is no longer produced in the body to a sufficient degree. Since serotonin is the main precursor for melatonin production in the evening, it is also possible to explain why serotonin deficiency can lead to insomnia. Right? Insomnia is one of the main symptoms, one of the usual symptoms of depression. Many people have called depression a serotonin deficiency. And if you are deficient in serotonin, you will most likely be also deficient in melatonin. It was Lerner who discovered the sleep-supporting effect of melatonin through a self-experiment. He took 100 milligrams of melatonin, which is a huge dose, and noticed that, apart from great fatigue, he had no side effects. Another breakthrough came in 1963, when Richard Wortman found out that melatonin only enters the circulatory system in the dark. The negative effect of light on melatonin production was first demonstrated by Alfred Louis in 1981. Thus, it could be shown that the light-dark clock in our body is translated into a signal, which then determines our rhythm. And that signal is melatonin. And research is rapidly increasing on melatonin. In 1995, 465 studies on melatonin were published, according to PubMed. In 2016, there were 1,092 studies. And just a year later, as of January 2017, there were 21,893 articles published on PubMed. So interest in melatonin has effectively exploded. And for good reason, as we're going to see, with lots of benefits, but also because melatonin is so cheap. I sell supplements for a living. Melatonin is one of the cheapest supplements out there, where you can actually get a good solid dose that will actually do something and you can actually feel the effect pretty much right away. Even if you take a strong dose, like 10 milligrams per day, it should cost you less than 10 cents to get that daily dose. So it's really awesome to see such a cheap and widely available generic compound have such widespread effects. And why is this important? Well, studies of shift workers have shown that they suffer much more frequently from diabetes, hypertension, and cancer. All rhythmic disturbances have one thing in common: an interrupted, often reduced melatonin production. The choked melatonin production also disrupts processes of cell division and repair, which increases the risk of tumor formation. Older and recent studies always conclude that every disturbance of our natural rhythm or altered release of melatonin has serious consequences on our health. And at the very end of this episode, by the way, I'm going to talk more about shift work and my opinion on what we should do about it, individually and as a society. Melatonin is the most important pulse generator in our body, and it can synchronize all rhythms, such as insulin resistance and other hormones, heart or respiratory release, etc. Going to go into all this. Besides melatonin, the hormone cortisol plays a key role in our circadian rhythm. Melatonin makes us sleep in the night. Cortisol gets us up in the morning and takes care of our activity during the day until evening, when melatonin production begins. It is interesting to note that a shift of the melatonin rhythm almost always causes a shift in cortisol release. Remember, cortisol is your stress hormone as well. A lot of people ask, what do I do about my elevated cortisol? Well, besides our regular nutritional advice, you really want to take this episode to heart here, because your circadian rhythm matters for the release of most of your hormones, including cortisol. In the elderly, the melatonin level is significantly lower, and the nightly release takes place for significantly fewer hours than in children or adolescents, or younger adults. Studies have shown that more than 80% of all elderly people have a melatonin deficiency. This is also one of the reasons why older people often suffer from sleep disorders. I would also say it's usually because they have many different nutrient deficiencies and they're usually on many different drugs, which can affect sleep and can affect melatonin, and we'll get to some of those. Melatonin is highest at the ages of 1 to 3. At the age of 70, the melatonin level is often less than 1/10 of this peak, and the duration of the secretion is no longer 6 to 7 hours, but rather only 2 to 3 hours. Most accidents happen between 2 and 3 a.m., regardless of whether people are well rested or not. An Italian study examined the melatonin level of hospital workers to determine whether there is a link between the risk of injury and a low level of melatonin. The study confirmed that subjects who had not been injured had higher melatonin levels than those who had been injured. The subjects who had less melatonin performed shift work and had not yet gotten used to the new rhythm. Shift workers are much more likely to develop breast cancer. The World Health Organization has therefore recently classified shift work as possibly cancer-promoting and postulated a direct relationship with disturbed melatonin production. And by the way, this book was published in 2017, so it's still pretty recent. Typical symptoms of a disturbed sleep-wake rhythm through jet lag, or shift work, include nighttime insomnia, drowsiness during the day, general malaise, which means general discomfort or uneasiness, malaise, and other somatic symptoms such as concentration and cardiovascular problems. Potential health effects are daily fatigue, problems falling or staying asleep, limited physical fitness, reduced thinking, mood swings, depression, gastrointestinal and psychosomatic problems, and reduced reaction time. In the worst case, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and cancer develop. This is from a disturbed sleep-wake rhythm. Can impact every system in the body, basically. Also, the change to daylight savings time, with 1 hour more of sunlight but also an hour less of sleep, can have serious consequences. Shortly after the time change, an 8% increase in strokes was observed. Although this value normalized after a few days, the study shows that even the slight shift of the day-night rhythm has a serious effect on our bodies because the body needs time to adjust. Maybe we stop doing daylight saving time, in my opinion. Most species do not have melatonin receptors in the cerebral cortex and almost none in the cerebellar cortex. This is quite different from humans, who have the most receptors in the cerebellum, in the cerebral cortex, and in the pineal glands. In those areas that are responsible for reproduction, humans have virtually no receptors. For example, the melatonin action via the receptors in the cerebellar cortex provides signals so that we can completely relax our muscles while we sleep. However, an animal does not know any complete muscle relaxation and is always ready to flee, even in sleep. I thought that point was interesting. Of course, we all know you can startle a dog while it's sleeping and it shoots right up ready to go. But do that same thing to a human, they're going to be very disoriented and they're still sleeping, basically, in a way. And I do find it odd that we're so vulnerable in our sleep. Whereas, yeah, basically every other species is going to be ready to go in a split second if you wake it up. And honestly, this might be one of the reasons why we live so long. Like any animal with comparable anatomy, we crush them on longevity. Very few species live longer than us, and those that do are very different from us. Maybe this is one reason we actually get a full, deep sleep. When we are asleep, we're truly asleep and our bodies can fully relax and restore. Even though other animals sleep all the time, it appears that they don't get the same deep sleep as us. Just speculation on my part. In addition to the cerebrum, the human body has many other areas in the body where melatonin receptors can be found. They are distributed throughout the body's organs and cell structures, such as the spinal cord, retina, spleen, pituitary gland, liver, kidney, thymus, heart, and lungs, and less so in the testicles, pancreas, lymphocytes, and blood vessels. And lymphocytes are white blood cells, by the way, part of the immune system. Melatonin receptors have also been found in the uterus, so this organ is also controlled by our circadian rhythm. That's the hypothesis here, that all of those organs and cells listed are in some way dependent on the circadian rhythm because they have melatonin receptors. The melatonin receptors in the human body fulfill different functions depending on the location. For example, melatonin acts differently on our metabolism through its specific receptors in the gastrointestinal tract. In the brain, it controls cognitive performance and sleep behavior. In the cardiovascular system, it lowers heart rate and blood pressure. Some behaviors of melatonin are receptor dependent and others are independent of a receptor. So in some cases, the melatonin only works if it meets with a receptor, and in some cases, it doesn't matter. It's the melatonin itself that seems to do the action. For example, an example of receptor dependent is the regulation of the circadian rhythm and thus supporting our sleep patterns, healthy bone growth, and protection against numerous diseases, including malignancies. But an example of an independent effect is that melatonin also acts as a free radical scavenger, which means it's an antioxidant, and this doesn't matter whether there's a receptor there or not. So this protects the cells against damage resulting from oxidative stress, i.e. stroke or heart attack, UV rays, X-rays, or anemia. And this antioxidant effect also applies in animals equally as in humans, because quite a bit of this research has been done on animals. In addition to the pineal gland, other cells of our body have the ability to produce melatonin, especially in their mitochondria. But this melatonin is not released into the blood, as from the pineal organ, but acts directly on the spot. So the mitochondria is producing energy, and it's like the engine of the cell, but it's also, just like a car engine, it's producing waste products at the same time. So it's very smart that the mitochondria can also produce melatonin, which is an antioxidant, which can help deal with the waste that the mitochondria itself is producing. But since this is all happening within the cell, this often makes it impossible to prove how much melatonin is produced in these cells. But we do know that melatonin protects these cell organelles, the mitochondria, from attack by free radicals. The protective qualities and positive effects of melatonin extend to all of our cells, regardless of whether the melatonin was formed on the spot, originated from the pineal gland, or was ingested as a supplement. For example, melatonin has the ability to reduce the toxic effects of chemotherapy, which we'll talk much more about later on, while also increasing the effectiveness of such treatment. Ongoing studies provide the first promising results of melatonin in the fight against cancer. And it has been shown that melatonin is more potent in controlling free radicals than vitamin C and vitamin E. And I have to jump in here that there are other antioxidant nutrients, and I've never really liked singling one out above another. I've seen this before where nutrients are compared. Oh, this one is more powerful of an antioxidant than this one. Well, just remember that these nutrients are not merely antioxidants. They also have numerous other functions in the body. So comparing them on the basis of antioxidant power alone does not make that much sense. But okay, here. We should understand that melatonin is a powerful antioxidant, and this is probably part of the reason why sleep is so important. Right? They don't call it beauty sleep for no reason. Your body restores things in the night, cleans up damage, and so on, and part of the way it does that is through melatonin. And the reason here they're saying that it's better than vitamin C as an antioxidant is because vitamin C does not reach the brain immediately, while melatonin penetrates very quickly and everywhere in every cell. The importance of this effect cannot be emphasized enough, as more than 100 diseases of our time are associated with oxidative stress. Yeah, I would say practically every disease has oxidation or inflammation as part of the picture. Numerous studies demonstrate the high antioxidant activity of melatonin in the fight against free radicals, in the treatment of cancer, cardiovascular diseases like myocardial infarction and stroke, metabolic diseases like diabetes, inflammation, and apoptosis, programmed cell death, which is particularly important in chemotherapy. Furthermore, taken in a sufficient amount, melatonin is a very safe medication without any side effects. It's a bit odd that they call it a medication there, but I guess that's correct. Anything that is used in the treatment of a disease or symptom is technically a medication. And we will talk more about the amounts and the possible side effects later on. But before we get into the nitty-gritty next here, I want you to keep in mind that basically all of us, myself included, as I said at the beginning, are purposefully messing with our melatonin production. And it's very hard for us to avoid this. Unless you're going to sleep, when the sun goes down, turning off every single light, and you're taking care of your health otherwise, it's very, very unlikely that we are going to produce enough naturally. And normally, I know the importance of supplements. There isn't enough nutrients in our foods. That's why I'm in the supplement business. And there isn't a practical way to fix that. But in general, in this business, if it doesn't have to be done with a supplement, I usually don't want to do it with a supplement. In this case, I used to believe that we didn't need melatonin supplements. I thought, oh, well, we produce it in our body. I'll just go to sleep early and wake up early and it'll be all good. But that was also before I wasn't so busy online and I didn't have to do 12, 14, 16-hour days. Right now, I'm pretty much prevented from having a perfectly healthy melatonin circadian rhythm. And even though I am able to sleep properly, I actually take melatonin because I know how unlikely it is that I'm producing enough on my own. Again, it's very hard for me to avoid any artificial light. It takes only a little bit of light to disturb your melatonin production. So I used to think it wasn't necessary, and now I'm leaning more towards everyone should take it. Everyone in the modern world. I genuinely think that now. And by the way, I'm not even plugging our products here. We do have a couple of sleep products with melatonin in it, but they also have other ingredients in it, like herbs that are known to help sleep. And honestly, I like those products, and I buy them sometimes. But generic pure melatonin is so much cheaper that it's hard for me not to recommend that. It's accessible to basically everyone, and like I said earlier, it's like less than 10 cents a day for you to get a big dose. 10 milligrams is a big dose. You probably don't even need 10 milligrams. I take 10 milligrams because I work all day, all night, and I don't give myself that time to unwind, especially not in darkness. So I basically just finish working and go to bed, which I know is not healthy, and I'm not planning to do that forever. But right now, 10 milligrams, I think, is helping my body get to sleep faster and regenerate itself when I'm sleeping. You don't want to waste a sleep. And if you're going to sleep without adequate melatonin production, then your body might not be able to repair itself adequately when it is sleeping. And you might wake up and not feel 100% rested. So this is just a very easy way to mitigate it. And very few supplements in the world are this cheap and this effective and do exactly what they're intended to do. And one more quick point here. I sell vitamins and minerals primarily. They all have cofactors. We say the 90 essential nutrients, right? You need all 90. They all work together. Melatonin works mostly on its own. We do know that you do need tryptophan to turn into serotonin, which turns into melatonin. Yeah. But it's not like selenium, which, if you take it without vitamin E, it's probably not going to do anything. It's not like calcium that needs vitamin D to be absorbed. It needs vitamin K to be put into the bones and boron to be put into the bones. And it needs magnesium. That's its partner. And you need to have it in this correct ratio or you might mess things up long term. You don't need to know any of that complicated stuff when it comes to melatonin. The benefits of melatonin, all the ones that we're going to talk about here today, are independent. I don't think there's a single study in here that uses another nutrient at the same time, which is very cool to me. It's showing that just adding melatonin can help so many different things. And we can jump right into that now with the eyes. As mentioned, melatonin is also produced in the retina. And it has many important functions in the eye, including the control of the eye pigmentation and thus the regulation of the amount of light that reaches the photoreceptors of the eye. Now, I didn't understand that point, so I looked it up. And remember that melatonin is partially named after melanin, which is pigmentation. And there's a lot of technical words here that I'm finding, but basically it seems to me that it causes the aggregation of melanin in what's called the RPE, the retinal pigment epithelium. This is kind of a skin layer on the outermost layer of the retina. And the more melanin in the iris, the darker the eye color will appear. So people with brown eyes have more melanin, while people with blue or green eyes have less. Now, melatonin does not actually change the color of the eye, but based on the amount of pigmentation there, that will determine the amount of light that actually reaches the photoreceptors of the eye. And in addition, melatonin protects the outermost leaf of the retina, which is that RPE, the retinal pigment epithelium, from oxidative damage, since melatonin is an antioxidant. The British Journal of Ophthalmology published an alarming relationship between aging eyes and melatonin production. Measurements show that after the age of 45, fewer sun rays reach the inner eye. This is the result of the slight yellowing of the eyepiece lens and the narrowing of the pupil. For this reason, fewer light particles reach the most important cells in the retina that measure the day-night rhythm to regulate our internal clock. So if your pupils get smaller, less light gets through, and your body has less ability to tell day from night, which affects your melatonin production and sleep rhythms. Studies show that changes in the aging eye lead to a series of typical eye diseases in which the cause cannot be found in the eye itself. The consequences of worsening visual power include cognitive deficits, especially memory capacity, insomnia, depression, and prolonged response times. A correlation between this change in the eye and a disturbed melatonin production is therefore always emphasized. Macular degeneration is one of the most frequent causes of blindness in adults. This affects the center of the retina, which is responsible for sharp vision and is destroyed over the course of the disease. Well-known risk factors for macular degeneration are age, hypertension or high blood pressure, and lifestyle, like smoking and excess weight, sun, strong UV light, and oxidative stress. People with dark eyes suffer less frequently from this eye disease. It should not surprise you that the retina also has its own circadian rhythm. The clock genes in the eye ensure that important processes are regulated, including melatonin release or dopamine synthesis. These genes are also involved in all processes that affect the function of photoreceptors. A study focused on the interplay of circadian rhythm, oxidative stress, and age-related macular degeneration, or AMD. Even if further studies are required, the results of this study showed that a disturbed circadian rhythm seems to contribute to degenerative processes in the retina that are responsible for the death of cells. Melatonin, with its high potency as an antioxidant, can help to prevent the destruction of cells by free radicals and thus delay the progress of the disease and to protect the retina. I gotta jump in here as well. Again, there are other antioxidant nutrients here, especially vitamin A or retinol, which of course is named after the retina. And if you didn't know, eye diseases are all reversible. If your eyes have gotten worse at all since you were born, that is reversible. If you're like me and you're born with bad eyes, chances are it's not going to get that much better. But even me, my prescription was getting worse and worse. And now I can't wear a prescription that I got a few years ago. I've actually had to go down. And I can wear older glasses now and they feel perfect to me. So that says my eyes were in fact getting worse even though they were already bad. And that's because most eye damage or eye diseases are caused by free radical damage and nutrient deficiencies. And yes, melatonin is a potent antioxidant, but I have to step in and stand up for the other antioxidant nutrients, especially vitamin A. And here I actually have a recent testimonial from a customer. This is an email I just got. I haven't even responded to it. And he was updating me on his situation in general, but he said here, I went to get a new pair of glasses and a prescription in May. It's June right now that I'm recording this. At the eye doctor, my prescription went down from 2.25 to 1.75 in my left eye and 2.25 to 1.5 in my right eye. Last summer, when I first contacted you, I was suffering from blurry vision and was worrying that my prescription would substantially increase. According to my new prescription, this issue has obviously gone away and my eyesight is significantly improved in 1 year. This is an unexpected improvement I'm really grateful for. Just letting you know, this is a common result that we do expect. Not next week that your eyes are going to get better, but like that guy, a solid year on the program gives your body tons of time to repair all kinds of things, including damage in the eyes. And back to the text here. Some studies have already concluded that patients with macular degeneration have a melatonin deficiency. And now on to glaucoma, which is a conglomerate of different eye diseases, all of which lead to a loss of optic nerve fibers. The main cause of this disease is an increase in pressure in the eye chamber. And that's an explanation I don't like, by the way. What caused the increased pressure? Right? Don't blame the pressure. The pressure is the symptom. What's the cause? I would say the cause is multiple nutrient deficiencies, most likely a history of processed food, and also most likely a history of pharmaceutical drugs, as is the case in most people with glaucoma that I've ever seen. Just saying. Blaming the increased pressure is like blaming the tumor for cancer. It's the result of the disease, it's not the cause of the disease. So they're saying the main cause is an increased pressure in the eye chamber, often coupled with low blood pressure in the vessels that supply the retina. A weak circulation of the optic nerve through a blockage of blood vessels can also lead to glaucoma. as can chronic inflammation caused by an unhealthy lifestyle that favors oxidative stress, such as excessive UV light, smoking, and so forth. Remember that these eye diseases are a significant risk of having diabetes or having a metabolic problem in general. And those metabolic problems are caused by nutrient deficiencies in processed foods and usually pharmaceutical drugs. But circulation problems and metabolic problems go hand in hand. It's part of the metabolic syndrome, which is, again, why people with diabetes are worried about blindness. They're worried about gangrene in their foot, having their foot removed. They're worried about kidney failure and being on dialysis because the eyes and the kidneys are full of tiny little veins. So when you have a metabolic dysfunction, basically cardiovascular dysfunction is on its way already, or it's already started. And that hits the smallest veins first. So before your big arteries around the heart get clogged up, the small veins in the body get clogged up first, including the eyes, the kidneys, and the smallest veins in the body at the extremities. This is why your fingers and toes can get numb. That's why you can get gangrene in the feet, because your veins get smaller and smaller as they branch out from the heart. Just saying, this is a very common thing because the metabolic syndrome is extremely widespread, because nutrient deficiencies are widespread, and processed food is the staple of the American diet and many other countries now as well. And all of this is part of the same syndrome. If the disease has progressed, the optic nerve may die, the external nerves being damaged first, and then gradually the internal nerves. The result is the reduction of the visual field, from the outer edge to the inside, that can ultimately lead to complete blindness. Research has shown that photoreceptors can also be lost by oxidative stress from glaucoma. Again here, I think they're putting the cart before the horse. Is the oxidative stress from glaucoma, or is glaucoma the result of the oxidative stress? I would say it's the result. Melatonin can be effective by reducing pressure in the eyes as well as protecting the photoreceptors from free radicals. Precisely for the regulation of intraocular pressure, numerous studies with animals showed that melatonin can achieve outstanding effects. It has also been shown that a melatonin deficiency is a high risk factor for developing glaucoma. All studies conclude that melatonin therapy is particularly useful for people who have a melatonin deficiency. And you're going to hear that again too. All studies conclude this when we're talking about different subjects here in this book, which is interesting. That's not something that you see very often. Very often it's like some studies show this, other studies say, there's not much of an effect. But in the case of melatonin, yeah, most or all studies agree on the benefits that are touted about it. Very cool. And now we're done with the eyes. We're moving on to metabolism and the cardiovascular system. As mentioned, these two systems or problems go hand in hand. Science suggests that melatonin also has a positive effect on body weight and energy turnover or metabolism. A study of women in menopause has shown that the intake of melatonin for the duration of 1 year had positive effects on their body composition. The women exhibited lower blood lipids and a higher lean body mass, i.e. higher muscle mass, which corresponds to the body weight minus the stored fat. Melatonin also plays an important role in the synthesis, secretion, and effects of insulin. If the melatonin fluctuations are disturbed, this can not only lead to insomnia, but also to insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, and a marked circadian disorganization with further consequences, resulting in obesity and diabetes. And this is one of the reasons why I said this is underrated. Sleep is usually mentioned, but I'm guilty myself of not emphasizing it enough. You're going to see here more studies showing that just minor disturbances in the circadian rhythm or in the melatonin production can cause massive consequences, especially in the metabolic system. Don't take sleep for granted, is the point here. Don't think that you can do everything else right, that you can eat right and you can supplement right, but abuse your sleep and still be healthy. You can't. And that study that found that if melatonin fluctuations are disturbed, this could not only lead to insomnia, but also insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, and a marked circadian disorganization. They also concluded that therapy with melatonin benefits the health of the whole body. Studies demonstrate that melatonin is able to modulate the synthesis and secretion of insulin to protect the cells producing insulin from overload, thereby counteracting the development of type 2 diabetes. And your body does need many other nutrients, chromium, vanadium, zinc, magnesium, and more, to recognize insulin at the cell and let it in, but this is very interesting to me. However, if melatonin is produced less, for example, due to the use of sleeping pills, beta blockers, alcohol, nocturnal light, or increasing age, this leads to long-term insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. The reason is that melatonin acts on specific receptors on the pancreas, which is responsible for the release of insulin, thus preventing insulin from being released at night. However, if too little melatonin is produced for the reasons mentioned, a vicious cycle is set in motion. Through the release of insulin, even at night, the blood glucose level drops, and we get hungry. The nightly walk to the refrigerator is then pre-programmed. A further consequence of melatonin deficiency is that the body accustoms itself to the permanently increased insulin and is resistant, even during the day, which often leads to diabetes. Big problem here, guys, eating at night. Well, this could be the problem. Too little melatonin being produced, which fails to prevent the pancreas from producing insulin. So the insulin is produced, and then your blood sugar drops, and you get hungry at night. So maybe your nighttime cravings, which is something I get asked about all the time, maybe your nighttime cravings will go away if you started to go to sleep earlier and put the phone down earlier. And I know I'm speaking broadly here to most of the audience who is guilty of this. Because my regular answer is, hey, many mineral deficiencies cause cravings, and you might actually be craving protein instead. So if you're craving sugar, try having some salty protein instead, or have some minerals. But for a lot of people, this doesn't correct the problem, and this is the answer. This is the reason why. Because you have messed up your melatonin cycle, you have messed up your circadian rhythm. And instead of producing melatonin, you're producing insulin, which is dropping your blood sugar, which is making you hungry. So break the cycle, break the cravings. Numerous studies are constantly investigating the relationship between insufficient sleep and the occurrence of metabolic disorders, such as fatigue and diabetes. They all confirm that shortened sleep is a risk factor for a feeling of constant hunger, eating at night, and consuming too many calories. The consequence is a significant increase in weight, even to the point of morbid obesity. Sleep deprivation in men and women who were both normal and overweight contributed to a significant weight gain in all participants. Let me say that again. Sleep deprivation in men and women who were both normal and overweight. So some of them were not overweight, some of them were. But the sleep deprivation contributed to a significant weight gain in all participants. Not half of them, not 75% of them, all participants. This is a very powerful influence on your metabolism and your hunger. A disturbed circadian rhythm has long been associated with type 2 diabetes. Shift workers are especially at risk, in addition to many other serious illnesses. One study investigated this connection. For 8 days, students followed a normal schedule of breakfast in the morning, dinner in the evening, and sleep at night. For the next 4 weeks, the schedule was the opposite. Breakfast was eaten in the evening, the participants worked during the night, ate dinner in the morning, and slept during the day. During this opposite period, their evening blood glucose levels were 17% higher than in the morning, despite the same breakfast on the plate. I think that's profound. They ate the same things, but they did it away from their normal circadian rhythm, and their blood sugar levels were an average of 17% higher. In 8 days, does not take long to throw this off. Numerous studies deal with the influence of sleep and melatonin on the development of diabetes. For example, this one from 2015 here found that a sleep deficit of just a half an hour per day can favor diabetes. Just throwing the rhythm off by half an hour per day can favor diabetes. Melatonin can improve the function of beta cells, which are the cells in the pancreas that produce insulin, and support the release of insulin through the day. A study shows that dysfunction and loss of beta cells are potentially responsible for the disease in both types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. This is a surprising result, as it had been assumed that only type 1 diabetes will destroy the beta cells, and the blood glucose level will subsequently be out of control. But remember that melatonin has the ability to regulate the release of insulin and can thus protect from overload. Yeah, that is surprising. It's surprising to me. I have written a book about blood sugar. It's called Everything You Should Know About Healthy Blood Sugar. And the first chapter is about type 1 diabetes, in which, yes, there is a lack of insulin, but this will cause me to re-examine just a little bit because we know there are some things that can actually cause the pancreas to not produce insulin. Nutrient deficiencies are one, chronic immune problems are another, where your cells are attacking their own organs and stuff. This can happen in the thyroid as well. Doctors call this an autoimmune disease. We don't like that word. But it is true that your cells can actually attack your organs in some cases, and this can be true for the pancreas and the beta cells as well. So I'm very interested in this, that dysfunction and loss of beta cells are potentially responsible for the disease in both types of diabetes. And I want you to keep in mind here too, from my perspective in nutrition generally, I do know that throwing your sleep off, whether we put melatonin in the conversation or not, throwing your sleep off will affect your nutrition in general. It will affect your metabolism in general. And a lot of other nutrients are going to be at play here. And all of those nutrients are going to be adversely affected by lack of sleep and therefore lack of melatonin as well. Just saying that the correlation between melatonin is also going to be a correlation between other nutrient deficiencies that are caused or exacerbated by the lack of sleep. Lack of sleep is a big problem, whether melatonin is brought up in the conversation or not. In a study with rats here that were diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, melatonin provided protection from hyperlipidemia, or high cholesterol, and hyperglycemia, high blood sugar. In mice, there was an improvement in insulin resistance and glucose metabolism. In another study with postmenopausal women, it was found that melatonin improves glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity in older women. Again, guys, this is great. A proper supplement program, like from us, for example, you could do it for $100 a month or less for a great supplement program. That's about $3 a day. But being more realistic, most of us who are conscientious about this, most of us spend between $5 and $10 per day on our supplement program, which I consider very reasonable. It's less than the cost of food, obviously, and to me, it's more important than food for the most part. We're not lacking in food in general in this modern world. We are lacking in nutrients. You can't even buy a sandwich these days for $10. So to get an awesome, comprehensive supplement program for $10 a day is great to me. And generally, again, I'm recommending less than that for the average person, especially to start. And I'm fine if they're on the $100 a month program. But most of us who really take matters into our own hands, we do spend between $5 and $10 a day. And I already mentioned earlier, less than 10 cents a day can get you enough melatonin. So anybody who's struggling with money and does have these problems, metabolic problems and diabetes and so on, insulin resistance, you have no excuse not to buy some melatonin and start on it. All the grocery stores I go to around me, it's basically $10 or less for 120 capsules of 10 milligrams, and that's a high dose. So you can probably even get it for less. And regulating your sleep is free, by the way. Healthy sleep habits, which we'll talk about later, and we've already mentioned some of them. Don't stay up too late, don't stay on the phone too late, don't eat at night. These are free things to implement. Don't have coffee at night, don't have chocolate at night. Chocolate has caffeine in it, right? Anytime in the afternoon hours, limit your consumption of caffeine. Don't run a marathon at night. Anything that jacks you up, take it easy in the evening. Go to sleep at the same time every day. Wake up at the same time every day. All of these are free behaviors that can work to get your circadian rhythm in check and massively reduce your risk of metabolic problems, cardiovascular problems, and more, as we'll see in the episode. A further study found that melatonin as an effective antioxidant also improves the efficacy of oral anti-diabetics. So basically, diabetes drugs work better. Considering the fact that melatonin deficiency is especially severe in the elderly, it becomes clear why this particular group of people has an increased risk of diabetes, because melatonin can no longer control the nightly insulin distribution. It is known from animal experiments that melatonin can specifically suppress insulin resistance via specific receptors. If the nocturnal melatonin is missing, the beta cells release insulin at night, a time when it is not needed. If you fail to produce melatonin, your pancreas produces insulin instead. Big problem. It is currently postulated that this increased nighttime release of insulin contributes to the fact that insulin receptors can no longer be formed in the long term, or the insulin receptor can no longer function properly on the body cells. As a result, excess blood sugar and then diabetes develop. For some time now, researchers have been observing the relationship between sleep disorders and obesity. In people who sleep fewer than 4 hours, the body secretes the hunger-inducing hormone ghrelin and produces less leptin, a hunger-suppressing hormone. In short, sufficient sleep also leads to balanced eating habits and a healthy body. Evidence that melatonin has a positive effect on body weight and metabolism is increasing. A recent study explored the differences between night owls and early risers and concluded that night owls tend to eat late in the day, smoke, exercise less, and develop diabetes or metabolic disorders such as metabolic syndrome. And the metabolic syndrome, again, it includes blood sugar problems, blood fat problems like high cholesterol, blood pressure problems, and obesity. An older study investigated the impact of sleep deprivation on young, healthy adults. Male subjects slept only 4 hours per night over 6 days. As a result, they developed symptoms and risk factors for diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular diseases. And by the way, that study was in 1999, and I found it funny in this book that he kept saying an older study or years ago this was found, but he's talking about like 1999, 2000, 2001. So I had to look him up. I thought, is this guy really young or something? Is he really biased to the new studies here? Because 1999 is not old to me. I love reading health and nutrition books from the 60s and 70s. Most people would be blown away by how much we had figured out, completely mapped out what's going on with a whole bunch of nutrients before 1980. Like, to me, not a lot of new stuff is relevant. But as we saw at the beginning, research in melatonin has really, really ramped up in recent years. So I guess that is one reason to be biased towards the newer research. This was just not being vigorously researched back in the 50s, 60s, 30s, like a lot of different nutrients were. Anyways, I just thought it was comical. An older study here. He's talking about 1999. That's not old to me. But yeah, 4 hours per night, these male subjects slept over 6 days, and they developed symptoms and risk factors for diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular diseases. Just 6 days. Next time you hear somebody say, oh yeah, I sleep fine on 4 hours a night, you can roll your eyes right at them. They might believe that to be true, but there's no way that that's going to be healthy for them. All right, now getting into the cardiovascular system, which follows the circadian rhythm as well. Shortly before we wake up, our body increasingly pours out the hormones we need to go from sleep to waking. In doing so, our blood pressure and pulse rate increase, so that we can get fit and active in the day. If we are healthy, this process is completely normal for our bodies. However, for people with heart disease, the rapid rise of these hormones can be a health hazard. Increased blood pressure and the task of pumping even more blood are big burdens for the heart. Heart attacks are therefore more frequent in the morning, as are strokes. I didn't know that, actually. Blood pressure reaches its peak in the morning and then declines during the day until it is at its lowest between midnight and 3 a.m. Our pulse also follows this rhythm. So I thought this was important to note. If you're concerned about high blood pressure, make sure you're taking it at the right time, or take it in the morning, midday, and evening just to get a better reflection of what's going on. It could very well be that you're measuring it at 8 in the morning and that's when it's supposed to be the highest and you're a little freaked out if it's nearing what's considered high blood pressure. You might not have high blood pressure. Just saying. Melatonin has been shown to be effective in the regulation of blood pressure. Studies have shown that the oral administration of melatonin reduces both high blood pressure and associated vascular reactivity. This effect results from the fact that the hormone has a relaxing effect on the vessels and acts as a potent free radical scavenger, since these free radicals have a negative influence on blood pressure. Again, your body also needs nutrients to have healthy blood pressure. But yes, oxidative stress is one of the major factors involved in the metabolic syndrome in general and cardiovascular problems specifically. Too much free radicals from processed foods and lack of antioxidants, including melatonin. Long-term melatonin therapy showed very positive effects on subjects in several studies. Their nocturnal high blood pressure could be successfully regulated and reduced. Arteriosclerosis, which is basically damaged blood vessels, develops slowly over decades. mostly without conspicuous symptoms. It is the cause of narrowed or closed blood vessels in over 90% of patients with chronic circulatory problems. And this is the main theory of arteriosclerosis, is free radicals damaging the insides of cells. And the vessel walls become calcified. And as a result, the vessel diameter becomes narrower and the blood can no longer flow freely to the organs. Consequently, blood pressure increases and vital organs are often no longer sufficiently supplied with blood. The risk of a heart attack or a stroke increases rapidly as a result of this arterial calcification. In the case of a heart attack, an acute vascular occlusion occurs. An occlusion is a blockage. The tissue supplied by this vessel suffers from an oxygen deficiency and is damaged. The primary goal of therapy is, therefore, to restore the blood or oxygen supply within a very short amount of time. However, as soon as the oxygen supply necessary for life returns, further oxidative damage occurs to the already attacked tissue due to the influx of the oxygen. This is referred to as a reperfusion injury. So this is a bit ironic here. You have a heart attack, and your tissues are not getting oxygen because it's blocked. But the primary goal of the therapy is to restore blood flow and therefore restore oxygen supply. But as soon as you do that, further oxidative damage occurs because oxygen is oxidizing. But these damages can be significantly mitigated, if not prevented, by administering high doses of melatonin. Early studies show that melatonin can significantly reduce the extent of cell damage in these situations thanks to its antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effect. In order to achieve this effect, though, melatonin must be given immediately after the occlusion of the vessel, irrespective of the time of day. So if somebody has a heart attack, big dose of melatonin. I assume here it could be done oral or IV. However it is, doesn't matter what time of day it is, big dose of melatonin. Some in vitro studies have shown that melatonin is efficient in the inhibition of LDL oxidation. In simplified terms, the deposition of cholesterol on the vessel walls is reduced, which is regarded as one of the main causes of arteriosclerosis. Yeah, so this is important actually. Even Dr. Wallach, who I'm kind of his disciple here, Dr. Wallach, he says that the cholesterol in the arteries is actually just oxidized cholesterol. So especially oxidized LDL, caused by free radical damage, which is usually caused by processed foods because that's where we get most of our free radicals from. Most of us are not sitting with our mouth around a car exhaust, right? We're eating deep fried food. Well, I'm not eating it, but many people are eating deep fried food and other processed foods, burned sugar and processed cookies and stuff like that. Bags of chips. These are all huge, huge, huge sources of free radicals. And so that's his theory, that the collection of cholesterol inside of the veins is actually just oxidized LDL. And I know he would say this is because he found it in vegan animals as well. And he wrote this up in 1971 and published it, where he was doing autopsies on animals who died in the zoo. Specifically, there were Moroccan mountain goats, I believe, or mountain sheep that he used for this paper. And yeah, he found cholesterol in their arteries. So he's sitting there like, well, they don't eat cholesterol. What's going on here? But they were eating oxidized grains. And most regular doctors actually do believe that it's the cholesterol you consume that actually ends up in your veins, but it's not true. Cholesterol is an essential nutrient. It's so important that your body makes it. If you eat less, your body produces more. Cholesterol has all kinds of roles in the body, but this is not a cholesterol episode, so we're not going to go all the way into it. Just saying that cholesterol itself can't be the bad guy because cholesterol is an essential nutrient that your body produces. It's needed in every cell in the body. But what is a problem is free radical damage and lack of antioxidants to combat that. And Dr. Wallach is not the only one that believes that it's that oxidized LDL that actually does accumulate on the inside of the veins. And I agree. Stroke is the second most common cause of death worldwide. 85% of strokes occur because a blood vessel is blocked in the brain. In the remaining 15% of all strokes, a sudden bursting of a vessel is the cause. The risk factors for strokes, such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, or excess weight, as well as too much alcohol, smoking, and a lack of exercise, can be reduced by changing the lifestyle. I would throw in here that includes getting off of processed foods, taking a bunch of supplements, because no matter what you eat, there's not going to be enough nutrients in the food, especially if you're looking at minerals. And nutrient intake, to me, is the backbone of these problems: high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, and excess weight. And yes, those other things matter as well, especially too much alcohol, big problem. And yeah, these are all within your control. Remember, guys, that even the CDC in America, they divide the causes of illnesses into a few categories. First, they say hereditary, means genetic, environment, medical intervention, and lifestyle. And in the CDC's own numbers, they're basically telling us that 82% of the cause of disease are within your control, which means improving your environment, avoiding medical interventions, and changing how you live. And I didn't make this up, by the way. They say genetics is 18% of the cause of illness in general. Environment, 19%. Medical intervention is 10%. Even the CDC admits that medical intervention is the cause of 10% of all illnesses. And lifestyle is 53%, over half. Even if you just took that one piece of information alone, lifestyle accounts for over half of disease, according to the CDC. That's amazing, because that means over half of disease can be completely avoided because your lifestyle is in your control. And if you take these other things, environment and medical intervention, meaning you avoid doctors unless it's an absolute emergency, then 82% of diseases are in your control. It's pretty amazing to me. That's not a fringe conspiracy theorist. That's mainstream government agencies saying it. And back to strokes. Many studies have shown that shift work is one of the risk factors that favor a stroke. A study showed that shift work could adversely affect the severity of a stroke, especially in men. And studies have shown years ago that the relationship among hypertension, vascular function, and the circadian clock is a key factor in the development of stroke. Numerous studies have shown that melatonin has a positive effect not just in prevention, but also in acute stroke treatment. Its antioxidative potency is often documented and could significantly help in the event of stroke in order to alleviate further damage in the brain. When the stroke has occurred, it is important to immediately give higher doses of melatonin, as in myocardial infarction, regardless of the time of day. So just like a heart attack, immediate high doses of melatonin should be tremendously helpful. All right, and now we can move on to the digestive system. I want to preface this by saying that the digestive system is one of the most important things in the body. If you came to us for a health protocol, we start almost everyone on a digestion protocol, even if it's not obvious that they have digestive symptoms. I used to only start people on the digestion protocol if they had digestive symptoms. Now I start almost everybody on it. There's only a few exceptions, like if somebody's pregnant, I want to put them on the nutrients right away. It's extremely important for pregnancy. If somebody has cancer, we don't have time to mess around. And if somebody's already on a bunch of enzymes and probiotics and they're already gluten-free and all that stuff, there are some people who do genuinely already have great digestive habits. Those are the only people that I'm going to skip the digestion protocol for. Because if your digestive system isn't working correctly, you can't digest foods properly, obviously, and you can't absorb nutrients properly. Many people have said that most disease is rooted in the digestion, and I agree. And over the years, I've become more and more firm about this because our results prove it. We get better and better results when we focus on digestion first, for at least a month before starting on complicated supplements or herbal products or anything like that. So just saying, digestion is very, very important here. So I'm very interested in how melatonin and sleep is involved here. And the book starts off here by saying digestion is mainly monitored and maintained by the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, which are collectively referred to as the autonomous nervous system or the autonomic nervous system. Now, I never liked any of these terms. They sound like mumbo jumbo to me. I'm a simple guy. I like simple words. Parasympathetic means rest and digest. It's your relaxation nervous system. And the sympathetic is your fight or flight. They're the same nervous system, but your nervous system has two different functions. rest and digest, or fight and flight. So the book's saying here, while the sympathetic supports the performance of our body, the parasympathetic provides rest and recovery of our organs and stimulates our metabolism and thus our entire digestive system. And this is definitely one of the things that can impact your digestion. If you're stressed out, eating too quickly, not paying attention to your food, not chewing enough, this can cause huge malfunctions in your overall digestion. Studies have shown that the parasympathetic nervous system, which stimulates the body to digest food, it's the rest and digest system, parasympathetic, it is most active in non-REM sleep. The sympathetic nervous system, which slows down digestion, changes during REM sleep with the parasympathetic. This balance and interplay of the autonomic nervous system are incredibly important to maintain good bowel health. Bit confusing to me there. I'm taking this to mean that good sleep and not eating before bed is important for digestion, for good bowel health. The cells in the digestive tract produce 400 times as much melatonin as the pineal gland. Said this at the beginning. Pineal gland produces most of the melatonin that's in the blood, but presumably here, it's not proven, but presumably this massive amount of melatonin that's produced in the digestive tract acts directly on the spot. It therefore does not have the characteristic effect of a timer, as melatonin produced in the pineal gland during the night does. So all the melatonin produced in your guts does not affect your circadian rhythm, basically. But they're speculating here that it does act as an antioxidant on the spot, which makes sense since most of the free radicals that we consume come in the form of food in the digestive system. Although the exact function of melatonin in the digestive tract is not yet known, melatonin protects against ulcers of the gastric mucosa thanks to its antioxidant properties. Whether receptor-mediated mechanisms of action play a role here is still the subject of research. So they don't exactly know what's going on. That's why they're assuming that it is mostly acting as an antioxidant in the guts. Scientists have already found that bacteria in our gut reacts to melatonin. They also follow a circadian rhythm adapted to our natural rhythm. As soon as the bacteria notice that melatonin is multiplied, they begin to heat up and become active. What exactly this behavior means is not yet known. However, what is certain is that the intestinal microbes react to our sleep-wake cycles and thus definitely change their behavior. Many hormones that are associated with eating habits and digestion, such as ghrelin, insulin, and leptin, are produced cyclically over a 24-hour period at very specific times. If no light is present for an extended period of time, these hormone cycles stop and are only randomly secreted. Because these hormones can have a destructive effect in the gastrointestinal tract without eating, for example, when they trigger the additional production of stomach acid, this could be a cause of many gastrointestinal and nutritional disorders. And we could dive deep into that, but I'm just going to keep going. Scientists have long ago discovered that there is a direct link among the circadian rhythm, sleep, and the nocturnal reflux, which can be a big problem for many, many people waking up in the middle of the night with reflux. Studies show that disturbances of the sleep-wake cycles can lead to heartburn, the associated mucus damage, and stomach ulcers. Melatonin significantly reduces the oxidative damage of the mucous membrane and thus also the pain symptoms. Scientists suspect that melatonin serves as a universal protection of the stomach lining from the salicylic acid that is contained not only in many foodstuffs, but also in anti-inflammatory and fever-reducing painkillers, and for the production against H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori, bacteria. And salicylic acid is in many over-the-counter and prescription products, by the way, like skin cleansers, shampoos, body and face wash, and cream. And it is found naturally in many foods, including fruits, vegetables, herbs, spices, nuts, coffee, tea, honey, and more. So scientists here, they suspect that melatonin protects us from the salicylic acid. Melatonin may help to strengthen our intestinal health by regulating intestinal mobility, as well as the sensitivity of the gastrointestinal tract to acids. Various studies have shown that melatonin has beneficial effects on irritable bowel syndrome by, among other things, reducing abdominal and rectal pain, and improving the associated sleep disturbances. Because, yeah, digestive problems often cause sleep problems as well. If your stomach is in pain, you're not going to sleep very well. The antioxidative effect of melatonin also seems to play a role here. Various studies have shown that melatonin is an important regulator of both inflammation and motility in the gastrointestinal tract, suggesting that complementary melatonin might have a positive effect on large intestine inflammation. One study even suggests that melatonin can prevent the development of inflammatory diseases. And I assume they meant inflammatory bowel diseases there. Sleep also affects our immune system and strengthens our so-called immune memory, as confirmed by a recent study. If bacteria or viruses that have previously penetrated our body try to attack again, the T cells activate and stimulate the immune system to destroy the intruder before it can cause a disease. Researchers have now found that people who sleep too little are 4 times more likely to get the flu, colds, and so forth, because their immune system is weakened by sleep deficit. So sleep strengthens our so-called immune memory, meaning your body can recognize threats that it's seen before and mobilize faster with the T cells. Stress also has an adverse effect on our melatonin level. The increased adrenaline that our body distributes in stressful situations blocks the pineal gland, which in turn is responsible for melatonin production. Yeah, you ever been very stressed and you can't sleep? Numerous studies are in progress, all of which are investigating the effect, even if it's weak, of electromagnetic fields on melatonin production. I can definitely say from experience and from reading books on EMF, it's not an EMF episode, but we've gone into it before and we'll go into it more in the future, that insomnia and sleep disturbances are one of the most common symptoms of EMF sensitivity or EMF exposure. And I myself had that problem, and I'll tell you about that later. But for now, just know that EMF can definitely affect your sleep. A study investigated the effects of electrosmog on rats and their circadian rhythm. It was found that environmental stress factors significantly interfere with the release of melatonin. The exact nature of this relationship, however, is still the subject of intensive research. Electrosmog can interfere with the release of melatonin. That does not surprise me at all. And now we're going to talk about some of the drugs that can interfere with melatonin, such as beta blockers, which are used as blood pressure agents, anti-blood pressure drugs, which are usually ineffective, by the way. This is why we see people all the time who have blood pressure problems, and they're on like 4 different blood pressure drugs. And I always say to the customer, clearly they're not working. If the one worked, then you wouldn't need to be on the second one. If they both worked, you wouldn't need to be on the third one, etc. Doctors suck at controlling blood pressure. Blood pressure, again, it's part of the metabolic syndrome. You got to get off processed foods and get on the 90 essential nutrients. Sometimes it can be relieved quite quickly. I'm talking like a month or 2. That's if it's just a nutrient deficiency. Usually it does take longer. In most cases, the vast majority of cases, it takes 3 months or more, because they got to stop eating at least the worst of the processed foods. They don't need to 100% quit processed foods, but they should, because it does take that to fully rectify the metabolic syndrome in some cases. Either way, beta blockers suck at the job, and they are among a handful of drugs that affect melatonin formation. As their name suggests, they block the beta receptor, which is important in starting melatonin production. One study showed that patients taking beta blockers could be helped by the additional administration of melatonin to improve their sleep. That's on top of them already taking a beta blocker. Additional drugs that affect sleep include benzodiazepines or antidepressants. They stimulate sleep but suppress the body's melatonin release. In other words, by taking a sleeping pill, you block the production of your own sleep regulator. Tragically ironic. Sleep disturbances are currently mainly treated with benzodiazepines such as temazepam and their derivatives such as zolpidem. A study investigated the effect these drugs actually have on sleep and compared them to the effects of melatonin. Healthy women and men between the ages of 55 and 64 participated in the study. They were given slowly releasing melatonin, temazepam, and zolpidem on different nights, and researchers subsequently compared the influence of these preparations on deep sleep. The results showed that slowly releasing melatonin did not adversely affect the normal deep sleep phase in these subjects. Only a small, but rather positive influence could be observed in just the first third of the night. On the other hand, temazepam and zolpidem significantly reduced deep sleep during the night. In addition, it is known that many benzodiazepines suppress the body's production of melatonin and can actually even cause sleep disturbances. Another tragically ironic consequence of pharmaceutical drugs. Just like how antidepressants can cause depression, sleep drugs can cause sleep disturbances. Studies with aspirin, one of the most common drugs in the world, have shown that it can also partly suppress melatonin release. Many patients in the studies report problems during and after sleep. Paracetamol, another very, very common over-the-counter painkiller, anti-inflammatory, when administered in the evening, has been shown to inhibit melatonin formation to the same extent as ibuprofen and aspirin. So you might as well just understand that all of these over-the-counter pain and anti-inflammatory drugs can affect your melatonin, maybe not as much as a benzodiazepine, but it affects it. And these drugs also all damage or destroy the stomach lining and intestines. They can cause ulcers. This is very well known. And side note here, a lot of people are taking an aspirin a day in the hopes that it's going to prevent heart attack, but that was always a scam. That same study, which I believe was back in the 80s, 1988 or something, top of my head here, the same study also showed that it made strokes more likely. So, of course, the drug marketers jumped all over the heart attack thing. Take an aspirin a day to reduce your risk of heart attack, and never mentioned that it increases your risk of stroke. And it's true that heart attack is the most likely thing to kill you if you live in the modern world, but the second most likely thing to kill you is a stroke. Tragically ironic here. Lots of tragic irony when it comes to drugs. So paracetamol, just like ibuprofen and aspirin, has been shown to inhibit melatonin formation, although it is not that dramatic compared to some other drugs like antidepressants and benzodiazepines. If, on the other hand, these products are taken early during the day, they have almost no effect on the production of nocturnal melatonin. Small silver lining there. In addition to a healthy circadian rhythm, vitamins and minerals, happy to see this here, like vitamin B3, niacin, vitamin B12, vitamin B6 or pyridoxine, are also important for our melatonin production. Calcium and magnesium are also very important for melatonin production. That's what fixed my insomnia, by the way. These nutrients, all 90 essential nutrients at proper doses, all the cofactors there and everything. Similarly, tryptophan supports melatonin distribution. So I'm glad they at least pointed this out in a quick little small paragraph here, that you do need certain nutrients to produce melatonin. You need certain nutrients to produce all your hormones and neurotransmitters and everything. You need nutrients too. I know this book is mostly about melatonin, but this deserved a few more paragraphs at least to me. You can't just take melatonin by itself and be 100% healthy. Just saying. Melatonin is not exclusively found in humans. I probably should have put this paragraph closer to the top. It also exists in plants and is contained in measurable concentrations in oats, sweet corn, rice, ginger, tomatoes, bananas, and barley. However, you cannot cover the daily requirement of melatonin with just your diet, because, for example, you would have to eat 200 kilos of tomatoes to make your melatonin level rise measurably. And 200 kilos is roughly 440 pounds. So unless you're an elephant, that is not possible. A lack of melatonin affects those hormones whose daily rhythmic release is also synchronized by the melatonin signal. For example, if age-dependent melatonin production decreases too early in women, it can trigger a very early onset of menopause. A lower melatonin level means that the sex hormones are no longer sufficiently produced, and above all, no longer released rhythmically. A lot of guys are interested in this, wondering why they have low testosterone. And I always put it on the list when I mention it. You need cholesterol to make testosterone. You need many essential nutrients to make it happen. Exercise has been shown to improve testosterone, and so has healthy sleep. And again, I am guilty here. I'm apologizing here, and that's why I'm doing this episode. I'm apologizing for not emphasizing the sleep thing enough. But I do like to emphasize it when I get a chance. And guys, girls, women, men, everyone is guilty of messing up their circadian rhythm. Everyone is guilty of messing with their melatonin. Almost everyone is addicted to their phones, and it's messing with their hormones. They need to understand this. And it's not making them happy, too. Like, I hate phones. I love to take the opportunity to dive into this just a little bit because to me, the phone is the most important reason why we're so messed up in our sleep patterns. It's not the TV. It's not that all of us are going out to dance clubs at night. It's not that all of us are alcoholics. Most of us are very reasonable in our habits, except for the phone. Again, I'm guilty here. I'm not beating up on you. I share the guilt here. I'm on the computer right now. It's 6 p.m. as I'm recording this. I'm going to be on here at least a few more hours. It's going to be dark. I'm going to be messing with my hormones, my melatonin, my sleep by doing this. But I will take some melatonin before I go to bed. And I am aiming to get off of this. Like, my excuse at least is that I make money on the phone. I'm sure that 95% at least of the people who are listening to this or watching this do not make any money on their phone. It's not giving them anything. And I know people will come in and say, oh, yeah, but we learn on the internet. We share information on the internet. That's fantastic. It doesn't mean you need to be on the phone or the internet or YouTube or whatever at 10:30 at night, 2 a.m. That's messing you up. There is a silver lining to the internet and to these devices, but way too many people are using that as an excuse to justify their addiction to the social media. That's what it is. It's an addiction. And it's not helping you, and that's proven by many studies. Everyone's talking about this now. All the major outlets are talking about this, how Generation Z is the most depressed generation in history. They're more depressed than the people who lived through the Great Depression, more depressed than the people who lived through both world wars. The most depressed generation in history is the one that spends the most time on the internet. And it's not just Generation Z that's guilty of this. Again, all of us are guilty of this. 10 years ago, when I started in this health business, no elderly person had a cell phone, especially not a smartphone. I never saw an elderly person with Wi-Fi in their apartment. This has just become so widespread that you've got your 75-year-old grandmother on Facebook until 2 in the morning. And I truly hate it. I hate what the world has become. It's great that we can share information, but it's been taken way too far where people are on TikTok when they're driving and when they're waiting in line at the grocery store. Like, it's just ridiculous. We're not even living life anymore. And I know this conversation is about sleep and melatonin, but depression and insomnia go hand in hand. We are going to talk about depression soon. And once again, I know a lot of people, because they come to me for advice about health, they're eating correctly, they're supplementing, they're going to the gym, they're making money, they have a girlfriend or boyfriend, their relationship is fine, and yet they're still depressed or they're still anxious. I'm telling you, the phone is one of the biggest contributors. Not just because it affects our melatonin production and we're staying up way too late on it. People are sleeping with their phone in their bed. Oh my gosh, crazy. But also it's EMF. Again, this is not an EMF episode here, but this does affect you. Big time. I call it the third major contributor, the third side of the coin when it comes to the things that are bringing our health down the most. And to me, the main two sides are nutrient deficiencies in processed foods, and the other one is EMF. And EMF is becoming worse and worse and worse and worse, especially when we put it in our pocket. We put a microwave in our pocket. We walk around with it all day. People put it on their bedside at night. And no, turning it off is not good enough. I'm not going to get all the way into it right now, but turning it off is not good enough. Get it out of your bedroom. Put it down. Turn it off. It's okay to do research. Put limits on your time on these devices is my advice. And honestly, when it comes to mental health, I think your relationships are incredibly important. And it's worth mentioning that I'm not the only person that's extremely irritated when I'm in the room with someone who's on a phone. Thankfully, most of my friends, I'm not very socially active these days anyways, but when I do see most of my friends, we're not on the phone together. I don't take my phone out. Usually I don't even need to check anything or anything. Sometimes I do, but in general, when I'm with people, I'm with people. And if you're on your phone, there's no point of being in the room with me. And again, I'm not the only person that feels this way. You're irritating the people around you. The only exception is if they're on the phone too. And in that case, what's the point of being in the room together? You might as well be sitting in an opium den together. I look at these people, especially these kids, it makes me so sad. They're sitting in a circle on a bench or in a restaurant or something, and they're all on their phones. You might as well not be together. You remind me of drug addicts, zombies. I used to do drugs, I know. Sitting around a den, zombified with a bunch of other people, there's not even much point of being with those people. You're all staring at the walls. In this case, you're staring at a phone. It's pathetic, honestly. Again, I'm not here trying to beat up on people, but if you're wondering why you're depressed, if you're wondering why you're not getting ahead in life, which a lot of people are, man, what do I do? You know, I want to be successful and everything. How much time do you spend on the phone? You spend 8 hours on the phone? Are you selling something on the phone? Are you building a business on the phone? If not, then what are you doing on the phone? Even the research angle, people say, oh, we can look up information. It's true. But read a book. I'm a huge proponent of books. This episode here is about a book. Big part of the reason why I have any respect from other people and a career here is because I love reading books. And honestly, to me, now that I work on the phone and the computer, the time with the book is so precious to me. It's the time that I don't have to be on devices. It's the time that I can learn information much more effectively. Because I'm pretty sure anybody who's saying that they learn better on a screen is lying. And that's not something I hear very often anyways, but they're lying. It's ridiculous. No, you do not learn better on a screen. There's no way. And my mom's a teacher too, by the way, and she's retired now, but she does substitute teaching. And she tells me, and other teachers tell me too, literally all they do with kids now is give them screens. They spend all day on the screen at school. It's sad. It's tragic to me. And yes, it's messing with your melatonin. It's messing with your hormones. It's causing people to be depressed. The more time you spend on screens, the more depressed you are. It's a very clear-cut correlation. The screen does not make anybody happy. I just hope that's beaten in. And if I could wave a wand and never be in the same room with somebody who's on a phone ever again, I would be super happy. If I could wave a wand and disappear the internet and never touch my phone again, I think that's the best thing that could ever happen to me, honestly. I'm in too deep now, but I genuinely regret going online and making this my career. Because if I walk away now, then, I don't have an income, and that's a big problem. But I really do regret it. I do wish that I took a path that didn't keep me on the internet, and I am working very, very hard to get myself off of the internet permanently. Don't mean to get too dark there, just saying. Huge problem here. Depression is a huge problem. Lack of sleep is a huge problem too, and that's a big part of it. So let's move on to the production of human growth hormone, HGH, also called the vitality hormone. Because we already know that a lower melatonin level means that the sex hormones are no longer sufficiently produced. Well, this also applies to HGH. HGH makes us feel good, protects our bones and our immune system, and plays an important role in burning fat. If melatonin is absent, the increased evening production of HGH is reduced or massively disturbed. So we produce HGH in the evening just like melatonin, but if you mess up melatonin, then that is disturbed. Inadequate melatonin also affects the liver and the work that is usually done at night. The result is insulin resistance, which can lead to diabetes. The liver has a lot to do with blood sugar. I'm not going to go all the way into it now, but if you do not have a well-functioning liver, you're probably going to have a blood sugar problem. Most of the time, blood sugar problems are just nutrient deficiencies and processed foods, main cause here, but I have seen at least a few cases where we actually needed to do something about their liver function in order to get a result on their blood sugar. Just throwing that out there. In addition, the urge to urinate at night remains as strong as during the day. Because of the lack of melatonin, a special hormone that inhibits urine production, which is called antidiuretic hormone, or AHD, is missing. That's interesting too, okay? So urinating at night, this is a very, very common complaint. And normally I would always in the past just say it's a sign of a blood sugar problem, which it is. And it usually goes away when you fix the blood sugar problem. And now I know in more recent years that it can also be a sign of a thyroid problem, because blood sugar problems and thyroid problems can look a lot alike. Now I'm more attuned to this, but still, they have very much overlapping symptoms. But I know we have quite a few customers and people I know personally who still have trouble with urinating at night. And yet, they're on the program. They're off the bad foods. They're on the 90 essential nutrients. They're doing everything else right. They're going to the gym in the morning. They have healthy relationships. What's going on here? Well, this didn't become a problem until recently. I was just talking about phones. Guess what happened? in the last 5 years, especially the last 5 years. Everybody practically became addicted to their phones. And so I suspect that this is the reason why we still have a lot of people who are doing everything else right on paper and they still wake up at night to urinate. This should not happen. This is a problem and it disturbs your sleep. To me, it's just annoying. I don't want to wake up at night, but yeah, it disturbs your sleep. So, people, take this to heart. Anyone listening who still urinates at night and is still asking me, is there another supplement I can take? Should I change my carb intake? Should I change my protein intake? Should I increase my fats? Should I do this? Should I do that? Maybe you should just put the phone down at 7 p.m. and have some quiet, simple time by yourself or with your loved ones, read a book or something, and take some melatonin. Get a healthy sleep, correct your circadian rhythm, because maybe that's the reason that the anti-diuretic hormone is missing. Melatonin deficiency has a special effect on our brains, negatively affecting our nightly repair mechanisms. For example, the storage of information to our long-term memory, which takes place predominantly at night, is no longer supported. A serious consequence is that we become more susceptible to early onset dementia. We're going to talk about dementia. Minimal disturbances while falling asleep or during sleep, and even too much sleep, can affect the quality of our sleep. Minimal disturbances. This could mean the cat jumps on you and wakes you up. Put the cat in a cage or lock it in the bathroom. I actually know people where this is a constant thing. Every night they're woken up by the cat, they're woken up by the dog or something. You need to get a hold of this because minimal disturbances while falling asleep or during sleep and even too much sleep can affect the quality of the sleep. The results of a study at the University of Pennsylvania consisting of a huge data volume of more than 130,000 people with an average age of 46 years was analyzed for the first time. The conclusion of the research team was that even in the case of slight disturbances of sleep, the risk of being overweight increased by 35%, the risk of diabetes by 54%, and of cardiovascular diseases by 98%. The risk of a stroke doubled. Again, minimal disturbances. I have to read this again. Increased the risk of being overweight by 35%, of diabetes by 54%, and of cardiovascular diseases by 98%, and doubled the risk of a stroke. That is catastrophic. This is why sleep problems are so underrated. This is huge. Very few other things will increase your risk by this much. Wild. And now we can move on to depression. Many studies have confirmed melatonin can have a positive effect on many symptoms during the treatment of depression. Particularly good results have been obtained in the treatment of sleep disorders. Positive effects after melatonin administration were also observed in patients suffering from winter depression. Their mood improved markedly as the melatonin synchronized the biological rhythm to the changed light conditions during the winter months or to those rhythms of people who did not suffer from the disease. An investigation has shown that depression can be predicted by the melatonin levels contained in saliva. You can see a very strong correlation among depression, melatonin, and altered sleep. And yes, once again, insomnia or lack of sleep or sleep problems, poor sleep, these are all common symptoms reported in depression, whether major or minor. In depression, a serotonin deficiency is responsible for the lack of melatonin. And by the way, I have read some books that kind of dispute that, saying it's not a neurotransmitter deficiency, it's not a serotonin deficiency, it's not a dopamine deficiency. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm just letting you know that there is a little bit of dispute on this concept of a serotonin deficiency, but we're going to take the book at face value right now. Again, it's very, very well researched and referenced, and I'm not strongly on one side of the argument or the other. So in depression, a serotonin deficiency is responsible for the lack of melatonin, because melatonin is formed from serotonin, which in turn is processed by tryptophan, and imbalances within the trio have an effect on each individual player. So you could be deficient in tryptophan, and then you're also deficient in serotonin and melatonin. You can throw any one of those three off, and it can throw one of the other ones off, or both of the other ones off. Studies suggest that a disturbed circadian rhythm could be responsible for many mental disorders, from clinical depression to bipolar disorder. Circadian rhythm disturbed can cause clinical depression to bipolar disorder. I agree. I would put bipolar in the blood sugar category, though, by the way. And again, traditionally, people who know and follow know that I call this a nutrient deficiency primarily, and it is usually pretty easy to correct. But we've already discovered how sleep disturbances and melatonin deficiency can actually cause blood sugar problems. So this connects directly into bipolar disorder for me. And I have been saying for the past several years, by the way, guys, I have to say it again here. I have to say it every chance I get, that it has been getting harder and harder and harder to help people in the health business. When I first came into this business 10 years ago, the people who trained me told me, Ryan, it used to be easier to help people. We used to use easier formulas. We used to use less nutrients, and it worked better. The products have actually gotten better. The availability of healthy food has actually gotten better. There was no such thing as a gluten-free section in the grocery store 10 years ago. Now, practically every grocery store. I live in the middle of nowhere. My tiny little grocery store has a pretty sweet health food section. So the market has adapted to our demands, and it has become easier to eat healthier. But I've even read in other books too, especially in cancer treatment, where people have said, oh yeah, we used to just be able to use this one thing and it worked really well. Things have gotten harder to help people in recent years, recent decades. Now, I've always blamed this on EMF, the increasing EMF. And it's increasing huge. Again, 5 years ago, it was not common for your grandmother to have Wi-Fi and be on Facebook until 2 a.m. Now that's extremely normal. But connecting this to what I was saying earlier, I think it's just as likely that not just the EMF, but also the fact that we all have smartphones now and we're all addicted, practically all of us are addicted to social media, that itself, the fact of being on the phone, being exposed to the light, messing with your circadian rhythm, messing with your melatonin production, could be the reason that it's harder and harder to help people. Be one of the reasons why it's harder and harder to help people with all categories of problems, including the metabolic problems, which is what I would put bipolar in. Blood sugar problem, metabolic problem. Your mood rises and falls with your blood sugar, basically. But if you're on TikTok till 1 a.m. and you're sleeping with your phone beside your head and you're waking up early and starting to scroll right away, that could be messing with your blood sugar, regardless of what nutrients you intake and all the other healthy stuff that you do throughout the day. Just saying. People suffering from depression almost always have a functional disorder of their serotonin level. Serotonin is one of the most important neurotransmitters in the human body and is also often referred to as a happiness hormone because our mental well-being is largely influenced by our serotonin level. Serotonin deficiency, especially in the brain, reduces our mood and creates a bad state of mind. As serotonin is also responsible for the development of melatonin in the evening, serotonin deficiency can lead to insomnia. And I added in here that serotonin is also produced in the intestine. An estimated of 90 to 95% of body serotonin is produced in the gut, which is one of the reasons why probiotics and even gluten-free diets have been shown to improve depression. You can look this up. You can Google this, right? Probiotics and depression, gluten-free diet and depression. There's a lot out there. Just saying. Having a healthy digestive system, to me, is key to your overall well-being and is also key for your overall mental well-being. And that may be in part because so much serotonin is produced in the intestine. And while I was getting a reference for that, I discovered the origin of the word serotonin, and I'm interested in that, where words come from. Serotonin derives its name from its origin, the serum, and its ability to increase tone or vasoconstriction, hence the name serotonin. So it originates in the serum, and it can increase tone or vasoconstriction. And vasoconstriction is the narrowing of blood vessels, by the way. So it's a contraction of muscular walls on the vessels. Serotonin in the serum, and it can tone the blood vessels. There are studies that show that melatonin can improve at least some symptoms of depression, especially those related to sleep. Patients with severe depression were treated with melatonin, which was effective in improving the subjective quality of those affected. In addition, positive effects were found for patients suffering from seasonal depression. In combination with conventional drugs for depression, melatonin can increase antidepressant effectiveness even further. I would question the effectiveness of those drugs, but okay. I find it interesting. You'll see this when we get to cancer as well. Very rarely is like a nutrient, or in this case, melatonin, very rarely is that measured against a reasonable control in the first place. And second of all, many of these trials are like, okay, everyone gets an antidepressant or everyone gets the chemotherapy, but one group gets melatonin on top of that, or one group gets, vitamin C on top of that. It just seems very unfair when you're actually trying to measure the effectiveness of certain things when they're all on an antidepressant or they're all on a beta blocker. Like, yeah, it's great that melatonin can improve the effectiveness and reduce the harm from these drugs, but how about we compare the effectiveness of these compounds, these safe compounds by themselves without the addition of drugs? That would be great if more trials were conducted that way. But yeah, you see a lot of trials that are everyone gets the drug and then half of them get melatonin and they show an improvement. But I hate the way those studies are designed. I wish some people just got melatonin. Even better, give them melatonin and a good nutrient program and good diet advice and see how that compares to antidepressant drugs. I bet it will blow them out of the water. Another study reported reduced depression in patients with seasonal affective disorder who were treated with low-dose melatonin in the afternoon. A small dose improved the synchronization of the internal clock and the biological day rhythm with the altered light conditions prevailing in the winter. So they took it in the afternoon to help synchronize the clock. And the book talked more about this, but I didn't save a lot of that stuff. Another study establishes a connection between circadian rhythm and nutrition. The brain appears particularly sensitive to metabolic events, depending on the light-dark cycle. This seems to contribute to the fact that depressive people often have a disturbed eating habit. Yeah, big time. And when you're depressed, you give yourself the excuse, like, yeah, I can eat a whole tub of ice cream. I'm depressed, so what? I deserve it. I need it. I've been depressed before too, by the way. I hope I don't sound mean. I know that we're the worst when we're depressed because we're the least likely to do the things that are good for us, and we're the most likely to make excuses about everything, why we're not taking action, why we're eating poorly, etc. Okay, now we're going to talk about fertility and pregnancy. And before we do, I want to mention something that the book did mention, but I don't think I saved. Women need more sleep than men. Us guys, a lot of us, we can get up and go to the gym at 5 in the morning or something like that, and it's very unlikely that your female partner is going to want to join you. And I'm saying that that's a natural thing. There are a lot of women out there who think that they should keep up with men in terms of the waking up super early and, rise and grind mentality. You're not naturally suited for it. Honestly, I've never had a girlfriend that woke up at the same time as me or earlier. Never. And it's okay if my wife sleeps in. It's not a big deal. And I know that it's actually healthier for her. She needs more sleep than I do. And something that wasn't in the book, but from my personal experience here, I believe that disturbing the sleep cycle affects women more. We're going to see. We're going to talk about women here. I believe it hits them a lot harder. I know we can stay out a bit late, my wife and I, and I'm still going to wake up early. I'm pretty well regulated like that. Like if I go to bed at 10 p.m., I'll wake up at 6, but if I go to bed at midnight, I'll still wake up at 6. I'll be maybe a little bit groggier, but it doesn't hit me that hard. It'll hit my wife way harder. And it's true with many women in my experience, and from working with many, many women. Most of our customers and distributors are women. In the health business here, it's mostly women. Just saying, this is something I've come across many times. Women need more sleep, and disturbing their sleep cycle affects them a lot more than us guys, in my opinion. So here, we're first going to talk about fertility and pregnancy. Scientists and doctors have known for years that a healthy sleep rhythm is also important for a healthy menstrual cycle. The perfect interplay of rhythms and cycles in our body is decisively involved in female fertility. If these cycles and rhythms are no longer regular, this can have an influence on the fertility and the course of a pregnancy or the development of the unborn. If you are a woman, you may have already experienced your cycle shifting after a long vacation overseas or after too much stress. Researchers know any disturbance of our circadian rhythm can also shift the menstrual cycle and thus affect fertility, because you're only fertile for a short window there before ovulation, right? So you mess with your rhythm, you can mess with your fertility. And again, I have to say here in the nutrient business, they did not mention nutrients enough. They had that one paragraph about nutrients. Many, many different nutrient deficiencies can cause infertility, can cause miscarriages, can cause birth defects, can cause female problems, right? PCOS, fibroids, endometriosis. These are conversations for another day, and I've done episodes in the past. You can check them out. But I was annoyed that they didn't mention nutrients enough. I get it that it's about melatonin, but come on, we've got to mention nutrients here as well. It's not just about sleep. Sleep is extremely excessively important and underrated in its importance, but it's not the only factor to fertility and pregnancy and healthy menstrual cycles and so on. Conversely, sleep disturbances, as well as mood fluctuations caused by PMS, are also factors. Studies with women suffering from PMS have shown that their melatonin level decreases 1 to 2 weeks before menstruation, which can be a factor causing these symptoms. Less melatonin before they menstruate, poorer sleep before they menstruate, can mess with your mood, can mess with your metabolism, all kinds of things. As we mentioned earlier, it can cause insulin to be released late at night when it's not supposed to, which causes your blood sugar to drop, which causes you to eat carbs or ice cream or something weird at night, which in turn can affect your mood and your hormones in a vicious cycle. Early studies show that chronotherapeutic, so therapy that works on your circadian rhythm. They use this word a lot. I didn't include it a lot, but chronotherapeutic melatonin and light therapy could help those affected to regulate their melatonin levels and thus alleviate the symptoms. Jet lag and other circadian rhythm disorders can have a negative impact on the fertility of a woman, according to many studies that have examined the cycle and the fertility of nurses or flight attendants, for example. It is assumed that the interruption of melatonin production is the root of the problem. Female shift workers suffer significantly more from a shift in their cycle than those who do not perform shift work. A complex system controls the fertility of the woman, known as the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. The hypothalamus sends signals to the pituitary through a hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH. In turn, this stimulates the luteinizing hormone, or LH, and the follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. And this can get complicated. This is a very, very brief overview of this. Probably the deepest episode that I have on this is with Dr. Ashley Burton. That episode is called Women's Health and PCOS. Audio listeners, you can find that on the podcast. YouTube watchers, it's on YouTube. Rumble watchers, it's on Rumble. Women's Health and PCOS. Go deep into these hormones and tracking your cycle and all kinds of stuff she goes into. Not my specialty here, but these hormones trigger the ovaries to produce progesterone and estrogen. These two hormones stimulate a variety of physiological effects, including ovulation, and ultimately control the fertility of the woman. The proper functioning of this axis is an excellent example of the close connection and the circadian interplay of these signals, which determine the female cycle. All the mechanisms run after a certain clock stimulated from the outside via the change of light and dark. It is proven that melatonin is present in high concentration in the eggs, ovaries, cells around the oocytes, and the placenta. It supports the female reproductive system and protects every cell as an antioxidant from free radicals, especially during ovulation and fertilization. Very important, as we'll get to. Researchers have found that the melatonin level increases during pregnancy and reaches its maximum shortly before birth. Good egg cells develop embryos that develop just as well. Poor egg quality is the most common cause of infertility. I would disagree with that statement there, but you know my stance. Nutrient deficiencies and EMF, processed foods, can definitely cause infertility. I do not know if poor egg quality is the most common cause. I mean, I would say that poor egg quality is a symptom of a problem. Again, it's like blaming the tumor for the cancer. Don't blame the symptom. It's the result of a problem. But whatever, poor egg quality can result in infertility. One reason is that, like all cells in our body, oocytes are exposed to free radicals. And an oocyte turns into an ovum, which is basically the first cells. They start dividing and turn into the baby. I'm pretty sure. If the defensive mechanism of the female body is not able to ward off these radicals, for example, because of a lack of melatonin, this can have serious consequences for women who wish to get pregnant. Melatonin acts as an antioxidant in the ovaries. which may help with infertility. A melatonin treatment during the period when a woman wants to get pregnant shows improved prospects as the chance of fertilization and the rate of pregnancy are considerably increased. Definitely also increase nutrient intake and avoid processed foods even more seriously than normal when you are trying to get pregnant. But I will save most of that for another day. A study found that melatonin promotes the maturation of oocytes and mitochondria, which assume important functions of energy production in the cell. Surprisingly, the scientists found that mitochondria are also the most important production sites for the melatonin synthesis in the oocytes, and that in turn, melatonin improves the function of these mitochondria and ultimately protects the cells from free radicals. The researchers concluded that melatonin improves the quality of the eggs and accelerates the development capacity of embryos, not just after in vitro fertilization. But researchers have found that women who undergo IVF and who take melatonin have greater chances of becoming pregnant and giving birth to a healthy child. For this purpose, women with a very low fertility rate were given 3 milligrams of melatonin, not a huge dose, but not a tiny dose, for 1 month before undergoing IVF again. The amazing results concluded that melatonin input increased the gestation rate by 50%. That is huge. That is impressive. 50% improved gestation, 50% improved pregnancy rate. Another chronobiological study found that melatonin is essential for embryonic and fetal development of the unborn child. The melatonin of the expectant mother increases constantly during pregnancy and supplies the unborn child directly via the placenta. This maternal melatonin, which can also be detected in the amniotic fluid, has various functions for the fetus. On the one hand, it conveys information about light and dark cycles to the brain of the unborn child, which can help the child to form his own circadian rhythm. Although the fetal brain already has its own melatonin receptors, they have not fully developed and can be influenced by melatonin. On the other hand, it is assumed that melatonin also plays an important role in the activation of certain genes that are important from conception to birth. Melatonin promotes the development of the fetal SCN and can lead to subsequent behavioral problems of the child in the case of melatonin deficiency. SCN, by the way, it's a part of the brain. It's hard to say. Suprachiasmatic nucleus. They say it's a pacemaker, the central pacemaker of the circadian timing system, and regulates most circadian rhythms in the body. So melatonin, not surprisingly, promotes the development of the part of the brain that is also tightly involved in your circadian rhythm. But if melatonin is deficient, that may lead to subsequent behavioral problems of the child. Therefore, various scientists recommended melatonin supplementation for pregnant women, especially when sleeping problems occur. For the unborn child, the effects of melatonin are only positive. No negative effects have been demonstrated. If there are complications during pregnancy, it is usually due to a problem with the placenta. Again, I'm sorry guys for butting in here so much, but blaming the placenta is like blaming the tumor for cancer. What the heck? But okay, here they say, if its function is disturbed, this can lead to dramatic consequences for mother and child, such as spontaneous abortion, premature birth, premature placental solution, or preeclampsia, which is basically high blood pressure during pregnancy. A study showed that melatonin deficiency could also be a risk factor for placental dysfunction during pregnancy. Older studies show that women with preeclampsia have markedly reduced melatonin levels. Not too surprising since we already saw that melatonin has a role in blood pressure as well. The placenta of these women also showed low melatonin levels. With its antioxidant effect, melatonin can protect the placenta from free radicals that are toxic in preeclampsia and regulate the blood pressure of pregnant women. Children of diabetics have an increased risk of developing a metabolic disorder during adulthood. Also, a connection with a later cardiovascular disease is always suspected. A study has confirmed this assumption in animal experiments and has shown that melatonin, when administered during pregnancy, can significantly reduce the risk of subsequent heart disease in the child. Now, this is interesting, and I'm trying not to butt in too much here, but okay, so children of diabetics. So if the mother is diabetic, that means she most likely has nutrient deficiencies and poor eating habits. Not always. They could be eating well, but still have nutrient deficiencies. No matter what, you need nutrients to produce insulin and recognize insulin in the cell, and just overall to have a healthy metabolism. You need nutrients to digest foods and turn them into energy and all kinds of stuff. So mother has diabetes, therefore she has nutrient deficiencies basically by default. And in most cases also has bad habits, processed food habits, maybe some other bad habits as well. I'm just saying here that it's not surprising when children of diabetics also grow up to have cardiovascular disease because we share the same environment. I was born with health problems because my mom had nutrient deficiencies, which is undeniable in my case because I had a birth defect. And of course, growing up in that same environment, eating the same foods that she did, having the same nutrient deficiencies that she did, we had the same type of problems. She had osteoporosis, I had arthritis as a child. Just saying, habits run in families. This is not genetic. And I'm willing to accept this thing here that if you administer melatonin during pregnancy, it can significantly reduce the risk of subsequent heart disease in the child. But I'm also pretty firm in saying that the child will get heart disease if they share the same eating habits as their mother with diabetes and they share the same nutrient deficiencies. If they don't take control of their health by eating the right foods, avoiding the processed foods, taking enough nutrients, then they're going to get some form of disease, period, regardless of what was done during pregnancy. But it's great that melatonin during pregnancy can actually help the child and help the mother as well, as we've seen. Very good. Optimal fertility requires a healthy melatonin level. Many studies show that if the expectant mother is exposed to light during pregnancy, this has an impact on the development of the embryo, just being exposed to light. Researchers recommend that pregnant women maintain a regular sleep-wake rhythm, especially in the last trimester of pregnancy, which is when much of the brain is being formed, to maintain their natural melatonin at a healthy level. Long flight trips, especially over several time zones, are discouraged, as well as long-term stays in artificial light. Be aware that all of this affects your circadian rhythm and can harm your child. I changed that last sentence there, by the way. I changed a few things in here, but they said will harm your child. I said can. Let's be a little bit lighter here. Will harm your child. It just sounded a bit aggressive, so I changed it to can harm your child if you mess up your circadian rhythm. All right, guys, and since this episode is about sleep, I have to tell you my story about sleep. There's 2 plugs in this speech here, but it's going to be quick, I promise, and there's going to be no other interruptions in this episode. If you didn't know, I was born with health problems. I was born with childhood arthritis and all the accompanying pains and cramps and twitches that came with that. But I also had insomnia. And it's the same nutrient deficiencies that can cause sleep problems, muscle problems, bone problems, and tooth and gum problems and other nervous system problems. And I had most of these because I was severely deficient in minerals. Vitamins can be involved as well, so can some other nutrients, but for me, proper mineral supplementation fixed my problems very quickly. And I mean, when I added the right product to my regimen, in less than a week, my pain, twitches, cramping, and insomnia were all gone. And honestly, insomnia usually is one of the easiest things that we see fixed in this business. It takes a lot longer to rectify a hormonal problem, cancer, or anything like that. Insomnia is usually very, very quick, most of the time. And if you would like our advice on a health protocol for yourself, including supplement recommendations, food recommendations, and anything else that's relevant to you, you can contact any of our coaches, which is in the description. On the contact page, there's a questionnaire. You fill that out and send it to any of the coaches on the page. Our advice is free. We do get paid a commission if you do buy the supplements recommended, but the food advice can be just as valuable. And there might be something on your questionnaire that ends up being really, really important for your case. So I was fixed quickly with nutrition, but I didn't live in a city at that time. So EMF was not a big factor for me at that time. I lived in a small town and I was sleeping very well. And I had tried the normal sleep stuff, by the way, herbal teas and sleeping pills. And I was a long-time marijuana user. And that did help to a degree. You know, you smoke a bunch of weed, you're going to be tired. But none of those things fixed my actual problem. And my sleep was definitely still not correct. I was still an insomniac. Even the various antidepressants and antipsychotics that I had tried earlier on in life did not help me sleep at all. I know a lot of people say that it makes them sleep too much. For me, it didn't do anything for my sleep patterns. So for years, I slept fine, but then whenever I would visit my mother, who lived in the suburbs, basically the city, outskirts of a major city, I couldn't sleep there. And whenever I had to stay in any city, I couldn't sleep properly. So for the most part, throughout these years, I just avoided cities. But 3 years ago, I started spending half of my time in a suburb outside of a major city because my wife lives here. and I'm only allowed to spend half time here. But as soon as I started staying here, the lack of sleep became a huge problem all over again. And it didn't matter how much nutrients I took. It didn't matter what I ate. I cut my coffee in half down to just 1 cup a day in the morning. Didn't matter. And I do attribute this to the EMF. Now I have a bunch of anti-EMF devices, and I know the normal stuff. Don't put your phone by your bed. In fact, unplug everything next to your bed. Unplug the Wi-Fi at night. I know all of this stuff, but most of it didn't make that much of a difference. One thing that did help substantially was adding a grounding mat to the bed. I just bought a cheap grounding sheet from Amazon, and honestly, it helped by about 70%, which is huge. But I was still underfunctioning severely. The lack of sleep made me groggier and groggier, grouchier and grouchier, and I started to get random pains throughout my body. And I grew up in pain, I'm used to pain, but these were new, sharp nerve pains. And I was starting to get very worried about it, as well as inconvenienced. I've got a pretty demanding job, I need to use my brain. It's hard to use it when you can't sleep properly. So I was grateful for the grounding mat, but I still had to look further. And that's when I found hydrogen water. Hydrogen water has been a game changer for me. And honestly, I started selling it because I formed a partnership and friendship with the owner of a hydrogen water company, the one who just happens to be able to demonstrate that he has the best machine on the market. And I was mostly interested in the partnership because a lot of people ask me, what's the best water in the world? And there's no water that has more studies showing such massive benefit than hydrogen water. But the delivery method matters. A lot of these cheap machines only work for a couple of weeks. Then they look like they're working, but they're not producing any hydrogen. And then better quality machines, all of them cost over $1,000. I've seen machines at $20,000 or more. The Zontos machine that I do represent and recommend isn't the cheapest, but it is the highest quality that I can recommend. And I use it myself, of course. And most of the research about hydrogen water is focused on cancer, immune health, hormone health, anti-inflammatory activity, asthma, gut health, heart protection, liver health, all kinds of things, skin health, diabetes, weight management, blood pressure, athletic performance. But none of those things really mattered to me. Those things matter for me to recommend to my customers, especially cancer patients. I want them to have the most protection they possibly can, and that's where hydrogen water is most important for me. Because even though hydrogen water has been studied for many things, I wasn't seeing much about sleep. So when I started hydrogen water myself, I expected it to help me because all the evidence says it will help me. But I didn't know that its main benefit to me would be to finally let me sleep properly, 100% properly in the city. And I have seen references all the way back to 1964. Maybe there's earlier evidence that hydrogen can protect against EMF radiation. And since I knew that was the main cause of my problem, I should have expected a result, but I didn't. Now I'm sharing this with you because there is not that much research to this day about hydrogen water and sleep. Maybe there is and I'm just not looking deep enough. But I expect more research to come out in the future because a lot of people are actively researching hydrogen water and continuing to find new benefits. I was hoping to find some obvious study that would link hydrogen water to improved melatonin because that's the focus of this episode. But I know from my experience that nothing helped me sleep in a city, which most of you live in a city, I'm sure. Nothing helped as much as hydrogen water. And I have found references to sleep in studies on people, but they're usually not looking at sleep. It's usually just mentioned that, oh yeah, these people, they got this benefit and this benefit and this benefit, but oh yeah, they also slept better. That benefit is pretty underrated to me in the research. For example, here, a recent study in 2021 looking at biomarkers of aging in older people aged 70 years and over. They found that hydrogen-rich water was harmless and favorably affected several aging-related features, including telomere length, lower body strength, general pain, and brain metabolism, intended to improve DNA methylation, antioxidant status, and sleep is just the very last thing mentioned with 3 dots after it. It's an afterthought. And I did actually find a study about hydrogen water improving the melatonin status of plants, ochras, and increase the shelf life. I don't think that's really relevant, but I thought it was interesting. And many hydrogen water companies are touting this study here in 2023, which is called Hydrogen-Rich Water Improves Sleep Consolidation and Enhances Forebrain Neuronal Activation in Mice. And it appears that this study is actually a doctoral dissertation, so it's quite long. And I know it's about mice, but a lot of people are using this to show that hydrogen water may improve sleep in humans. Anyways, I don't have a ton of research here to share with you about sleep and hydrogen water, but I do expect it to come in the future. And I'm just telling you, nothing helped me more in the city than the Zontos hydrogen water machine. This is the machine I recommend if you are looking into hydrogen water. I've produced at least 4 recordings with the owner of Zontos Water. I will put those links in the description. I encourage you to check it out because you're going to see more and more people talking about hydrogen water. We're already seeing it become quite popular online, but pretty much everyone is promoting very cheap machines, and they're cheap for a reason. You can test them. We have tested them. Those are in some of the videos in the description. If you start looking into hydrogen water, you're going to find so many benefits. And if you want to try it for yourself, in my opinion, you're better off getting the best machine on the market than wasting money on an inferior machine that's not going to last that long and that doesn't produce enough for your whole family to actually use the water. And if you're making the type of investment more than $1,000, I hope you buy a machine that lasts a long time. And even the oldest Zontos machines, which are over 14 years old now, are still performing the way they're supposed to. Zontos is a small company. They're very active in their customer service, making sure that everyone has a good experience and that their machines don't break down and they don't just leave you in the cold if something happens. I trust Zontos, and the more I look into it, the happier I am that I made the choice to partner with them. My link for Zontos is in the description. You will hear me talk about it more in the future. And for now, we can get back to the episode. And one more section here on female health, about menopause. Menopause is often treated like a disease in mainstream medicine. It's kind of weird. It's a natural thing. But all of the symptoms that are common in the Western world are not common to other populations, and not to primitive women as well. Hot flashes and insomnia, these are all nutrient problems. We have many, many women who have eliminated their menopause symptoms pretty easily in most cases. Basic nutritional changes, basic supplement program. But here they're saying menopause is accompanied by profound hormonal changes, which is true, which not only lead to sleep problems, but also other symptoms. The extent to which melatonin secretion also changes is still the subject of investigations. However, studies on women in menopause showed that the function of their thyroid gland improved when they took melatonin. That's very interesting to me. I'm very interested in thyroid problems. For the first several years in my career here, I did not pay much attention to the thyroid. And eventually I had to really hit the books and figure out why quite a few women were not getting the results I expected on our normal program. And I discovered that almost all of those women had obvious thyroid problems that were not obvious to me until I began to learn about it. I will do a thyroid deep dive episode coming up soon. It is complicated, but this is great to me that melatonin can improve the thyroid gland, because not just women, but also men, most people who are not getting the results that they expect from our program, which is a very good, very comprehensive program, but also from other diet changes and stuff. Like if you're just not losing the weight no matter what you do, or just constantly feel bloated or have depression, anxiety, and everything else on paper is looking good, it's probably an underfunctioning thyroid. So this is another fantastic benefit of melatonin. Again, a very, very simple change here by adding melatonin and by correcting your sleep patterns. If that can improve your thyroid, that's fantastic, because having a well-functioning thyroid gland is pretty key to being healthy overall. You could do everything else, exercise, all this stuff, but if your thyroid is not functioning properly, you will probably have many symptoms. In addition, most women who were treated with melatonin reported a generally improved mood and a clear lessening of depression. Again, thyroid. This thesis is supported by the fact that high melatonin concentrations improve the general well-being in old age and lead to a reduced incidence of old age types of diseases. One study even showed that there was a correlation between disturbed circadian rhythm in women in menopause and a decreased bone density. Another work confirmed that insomnia in women in menopause increases their risk of injury drastically. Yeah, if you're tired all the time because you're not sleeping properly, you have an increased risk of injury. And now we can talk about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Very, very similar diseases. A lot of these diseases have different names for no clear reason to me. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, ALS, Huntington's disease, and so on. They're neurodegenerative diseases. The nervous system is degenerating. And before we hear about how sleep and melatonin is involved here, I have to say, to my memory, I don't think we've ever had an Alzheimer's or Parkinson's case that was not on a bunch of drugs. This means they've been listening to doctors for many years. In my opinion, these diseases are physician-caused diseases. Doctors cause them with their bad advice. They tell you to avoid cholesterol. Your brain and nervous system is largely made of cholesterol. In the case of Alzheimer's specifically, Alzheimer's is characterized by a demyelination. Myelin is the sheath that wraps around every nerve, like the plastic on a wire in your house. It's an insulating material around your nerves. Myelin is largely made of cholesterol. So you need cholesterol to repair your myelin. Now, your body makes cholesterol as well, but the problem here is, and what I think is one of the main causes of these problems, is that doctors have these crazy ideas about cholesterol. They think that cholesterol is bad. Meanwhile, it's an essential nutrient. It's so important that your body makes it because it's needed in every cell in the body, and specifically in your nervous system. High cholesterol is caused by processed foods and nutrient deficiencies. And since the average doctor has zero training in nutrition, they don't know how to get your cholesterol down in a normal, natural way. So they give you cholesterol-lowering drugs, statin drugs. These are one of the two worst drugs, is what I call them. And I'll put a link in the description for a video that I made about these two worst drugs. And I see this all the time. People who are in the worst health, they usually are on a bunch of drugs. None of those drugs are addressing the root of the problem at all. They got to keep adding more and more drugs because they don't work to correct you. They don't work to make you healthy. So you need more drugs. And almost always, the people who are in the worst health that you can imagine are on one of the two worst drugs, including a statin drug. And by the way, usually their cholesterol is not even high. They've just kept lowering the standard on what constitutes high cholesterol. So your doctor might see 200 or 205 and freak out. Your cholesterol is high. Oh my gosh. Meanwhile, people with higher cholesterol live longer. This is not new. There's a bunch of people waking up to this, including a new generation of doctors coming up, understanding that this whole idea that cholesterol caused disease is completely bogus. There's been some major studies that have shown that high cholesterol is not the demon that it's said to be. We'll go into that on another day, but I'm just saying, we consider the optimal cholesterol level to be 220 to 270. Meanwhile, we see tons of people all the time who are at 210 and their doctors got them on a statin drug. That doesn't make sense. But you can have truly high cholesterol, but it's caused by processed foods and nutrient deficiencies. And it's pretty easy to reverse. Just saying here, I have to say that these neurodegenerative diseases are almost always caused by more than one factor. Always there's multiple nutrient deficiencies involved. That's a guarantee. Almost always there's processed foods involved as well. Some people do eat well and they're still showing signs of dementia. That's because there's not enough nutrients in foods, no matter what you do. But practically always, 99% of the time, and I have no cases that come to my mind over 10 years that we've ever dealt with somebody with dementia who was not on a handful of drugs and not on one of the two worst drugs. So in almost every single case, it's a combination of nutrient deficiencies, processed foods, and drugs. But it is great to know that we can do some simple changes such as use melatonin to see a benefit, so let's check that out. What is common to most neuropsychiatric disorders, such as depression, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's, is a day-night rhythm that seems to be completely out of step. Patients suffer from severe fatigue during the day and sleep problems at night. The elderly are affected more than all others. And they're also the ones that are given the most drugs. And terrible food in nursing homes and stuff. And they've had nutrient deficiencies for decades. The longer you eat from a grocery store, the more nutrient deficiencies you will have. The older you get, the worse it gets. The elderly are affected more than all others, as their melatonin level is either too low or has shifted. One study showed that a regimen that restores the circadian rhythm through more sunlight during the day, a complementary melatonin input in the evening, and varied social and physical activities helps alleviate their suffering. Yeah, quite a few studies have shown that exercise improves these dementia symptoms, and yeah, some social activities, and even something simple like reading a few pages of a book a day or doing a crossword or a Sudoku puzzle. All of that stuff can help. But a lot of these old people are just plopped in front of a TV and live in front of the TV and sit there all day in a lazy boy chair, being given terrible foods, no vitamins or inadequate supplements, and handfuls of drugs. It's no wonder to me that they struggle with dementia, insomnia, depression, arthritis, osteoporosis, metabolic problems, etc. Studies have shown that melatonin levels are significantly lower in Alzheimer's patients than in healthy people. It is therefore assumed that this hormone could play an important role in its treatment. In addition, studies in Alzheimer's patients have shown that those affected also have lower tryptophan and serotonin levels, which play important roles in the production of melatonin. Many studies have focused on the use of melatonin and how this can improve some symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as dementia or delirium. What also benefits the patient is that melatonin has no side effects, which is not the case with antipsychotics and sedatives. In a study from 2012, Alzheimer's patients were treated with a combination of melatonin and physical exercise. This treatment reduced behavioral and psychological symptoms such as anxiety and cognitive impairment. The oxidative stress in the brain, an important factor contributing to Alzheimer's, has also been reduced. Some researchers have also reported that music therapy increases melatonin secretion. That's interesting. A therapeutic approach that is also used in therapy for Alzheimer's. In Parkinson's, certain brain neurons lose the ability to produce dopamine, a neurotransmitter that supports cognitive function, emotional control, movement coordination, and a variety of other important functions in our body. But by the time the diagnosis is made, 70% of the dopamine-producing neurons are often already dead. The lack of dopamine impairs a variety of physical symptoms, typically causing slow muscle movements, tremors, or muscle stiffness. Each of those symptoms are usually quite easy to improve with proper supplementation, especially in minerals. And although we're not allowed to tell people to stop using drugs, again, Parkinson's people are usually on a bunch of drugs, and these are common side effects of many common drugs. Sleep problems and the loss of the sense of smell, or insomnia, also usually accompany the disease. And to me, that's a signal of zinc deficiency, loss of smell and taste. And zinc deficiency is widespread in the general population, so of course, we should assume that in the Parkinson's population that is also true. Although Parkinson's is primarily associated with the decrease of dopamine in the brain, melatonin also appears to play a role. This could explain the connection with sleep disorders. While Parkinson's disease progresses, melatonin production decreases in the brain. Several studies suggest that the stabilization of sleep cycles by taking melatonin should be a standard part of the disease treatment. Some research also demonstrates a link between sleep disorders and the development of Parkinson's disease. A new study suggests that a treated or regulated sleep-wake disorder in the early stages of Parkinson's disease can delay those symptoms that affect motor function and movement for years. This makes it possible for those affected to live longer and healthier lives. That's great. And yeah, this is easy to believe for me too. Again, if you're not sleeping, you're not repairing your nervous system, not properly at least. We've already seen how important sleep is, so it should also be important in those who are affected with the most severe diseases. A study showed that melatonin also has a positive effect on anxiety disorders, depression, memory disorders, as well as on motor disorders typical in Parkinsonian patients. People with Parkinson's who take melatonin show fewer and weaker symptoms than those who do not. For a long time, this was attributed to the healing nature of sufficient sleep, like I just mentioned above. But today, we know that melatonin is not only a sleep-inducing hormone, but also a neuroprotective one. Melatonin can reduce, sometimes even prevent, the loss of the nerve cells and thus damage to the brain, as well as support the cells during their regeneration. Yeah, double whammy here with melatonin, helping you sleep and a powerful antioxidant. And now a really interesting segment here on epilepsy. Epilepsy is a disturbance of the electrical conductivity of the nerve cells in the brain. Those affected suffer from convulsions or temporary unconsciousness. Other forms of epilepsy are caused by oxidative stress. And I should say that we have dealt with a ton of epileptics, and they do not always follow the same pattern as with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's, etc. Because it's not always old people. We've seen children, we've seen babies with epilepsy, so they're not on a bunch of drugs. Usually they are on an anticonvulsant or something by the time they get to us, but It's not the same picture of decades of deficiencies and decades of damage to the body with processed foods. Not when it happens in children. So when it happens in children, to me, it's primarily a nutrient deficiency. And one of the most important nutrients here for epilepsy might be vitamin B6, pyridoxine. And there's actually something called PDS, pyridoxine dependent seizures, which here from a report back in 1985 from the Annals of Neurology basically says that every infant before 18 months of age that has seizures should be suspected of pyridoxine deficiency. And failure to treat these seizures, these specific seizures with B6, promptly results in severe mental retardation or death. And another article here from the Archives of Disease in Childhood back in 1983 says that many forms of infant and childhood epilepsy respond to B6 treatment. Manganese is another nutrient that comes up. Manganese levels being significantly lower in patients with convulsive disorders. This is again from 1985 in Biochemical Medicine. The researchers conclude that low manganese levels may heighten a tendency to seizures. And they also note that rats fed manganese-deficient diets have an increased susceptibility to convulsions. I know this episode is about sleep, but I have to be a bit balanced here. It's great to get good sleep, and it's great that melatonin can help many of these diseases, but these problems should be fixed when they were started, in most cases, by nutrient deficiencies in the first place, and melatonin can absolutely be used as well. Not going to go fully into it, but vitamin E, calcium as well. These have all been shown to be important when it comes to treating epilepsy. Even certain enzyme deficiencies are said to be linked to epilepsy. Thiamine B1 deficiency in its later stages of severe deficiency can cause seizures. Thiamine deficiency is extremely common as well. Magnesium reduces the likelihood and frequency of seizures. And of course, birth control pills and alcohol, by the way, depletes all of these nutrients. So if it's happening in older people, I'm going to suspect that that's going to be one of the contributing possible causes. And in my archives here, I'm a bit surprised that I didn't have anything about omega-3, especially EPA and DHA, and seizures, because omega-3 concentrates in the brain, especially in a child's brain, and omega-3 deficiency is absolutely rampant in our food system. Most people are omega-3 deficient and get way too many omega-6s. Again, I kind of apologize here. We're not going into a deep dive on nutrition, but we're talking about seizures. You got to know these things. If you're asking me what to do, I would say mega doses of omega-3 and reasonable doses of those other nutrients mentioned, which we do for anyone anyways. I would just crank up the omega-3 compared to a normal person. And I did just find a meta-analysis here from 2022 from the journal Nutritional Neuroscience. And they concluded that based on the available trials, omega-3 supplementation resulted in beneficial effects on seizure frequency in adult and children with epilepsy. And now you know. Of course, you want to have a gluten-free diet, especially if it's a child, so that the intestines are not inflamed, so that you can actually absorb nutrients properly, including omega-3 and the other fatty nutrients. This is all our normal program. We have great success with seizures, by the way. A lot of people who never had a seizure again. We're not allowed to say that anyone's been cured, but a lot of people who haven't had seizures in years since they've started our program, or maybe they had one or two instead of, one every week or something, the frequency got less and less, and then they stopped having them. That's the result I expect. Okay, back to the book here. Years ago, researchers discovered that seizures usually have a 24-hour rhythm and have established a connection with the circadian melatonin secretion. This was very interesting to me. I didn't know that seizures followed a 24-hour rhythm. The effect of melatonin on the seizures was examined in tests, with the result that the frequency of certain epileptic seizures decreased. Studies have repeatedly found a link between sleep disorders and epilepsy, which in turn suggests that the circadian rhythm has an impact on the onset of seizures. A brief sleep deprivation, even for just one night, is used to detect epileptic seizures better in the EEG. That was really interesting to me. To better detect seizures in an EEG machine, doctors will use sleep deprivation to cause it. Super interesting. A recent study of epileptic children between the ages of 6 and 11 found that the children's sleep improved with the intake of melatonin. In one study, melatonin helped children with their sleep disorders and the severity and frequency of their seizures. Further studies with children confirmed that the administration of melatonin reduced the severity and frequency of epileptic seizures. So, several studies here. The hormone can act as a neuroprotector against oxidative stress due to its antioxidant properties in the central nervous system, which is particularly evident in patients with epilepsy. In addition, specific melatonin receptors could be detected on the cerebral cortex, whose stimulation by melatonin suppresses the formation of an attack. Thus, melatonin with different mechanisms of action seems to have a positive effect on a variety of different epilepsy forms with regard to both the development and the severity of seizures. Very interesting, very, very easy to use melatonin here. Again, you don't need a full nutritional program, which I understand is more difficult to commit to. You got to throw things out of your kitchen cupboards and spend quite a bit more money than 10 cents a day or less for your melatonin. Moving on to ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is among the most common psychological disorders in children and adolescents, is characterized by problems with attention, self-regulation, and impulsiveness, as well as physical restlessness, hyperactivity. Children who suffer from ADHD cannot sit still, do not listen, and always want to have things go their way. Very, very common problem. I know a lot of people talk about how it's overprescribed, overdiagnosed, and yeah, I agree in general. School sucks. I'm not blaming any kid for not sitting still in school. I didn't want to sit still in school, but it was mostly because school was boring and lame. And on this topic here, the book did mention, though I didn't really go into it, that younger people, kids and teenagers, actually have a different circadian rhythm than adults, meaning it is more natural for them to stay up later and wake up later. That's not a problem for them. And of course, as we all know, older people tend to go to sleep super early and wake up super early as well. So at the beginning of life, well, especially at the very beginning of life, we sleep a ton, right? Babies sleep all day. Wake up for an hour, eat something, crawl around, go back to bed. But then children and teenagers, we all know this, trying to get a teenager to go to bed at 9 o'clock, very difficult because naturally they want to stay up later and wake up later. That's not a problem. But it's weird for me, connecting this to ADHD, that we make kids go to school at like 7 in the morning, 8 in the morning. You know, I had to take a bus to high school. The bus was like an hour. So, you know, I had to be up like 2 or 3 hours before school. Basically, I'm up early in the morning when that goes against my circadian rhythm and all the other children in the school. So this could definitely be contributing to why children have a problem in school. And of course, sugar and sodas and nutrient deficiencies and all that stuff applies here as well. ADHD to us is a blood sugar problem primarily. We already saw how sleep can impact your blood sugar metabolism. And I already mentioned that there are many nutrients involved. ADHD, yes, it is overdiagnosed, but there is absolutely still a rampant problem in our society. We have probably all seen kids in the mall or the grocery store screaming, "Mommy, buy this for me, or I'm going to throw a tantrum right here in the grocery store," and the parents are embarrassed and all this. You know, that's not an overdiagnosis. That's ADHD. And it is extremely common. I'm sure everybody listening to this knows at least one child with these behavioral problems. Always wants to have everything go their way, and if not, they'll freak out. That's a blood sugar problem to me. Sleep is involved, nutrient deficiencies are involved, and processed food is also involved. But adults may also be affected by ADHD, but with the exception of attention deficit, the symptoms are different. So they might still have attention deficit, but usually an adult with ADHD has depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. So it's still, you know, impulsive problems with self-regulation, etc. And a lack of dopamine is one of the suspected contributing causes. And once again, I don't like blaming a lack of dopamine or a lack of this neurotransmitter or that chemical, because all of those neurotransmitters are made from nutrition. We need nutrients to produce our own hormones, our own testosterone and estrogen, progesterone, dopamine, glutathione, whatever it is that you want to name. We make these things in the body based on nutrients. And yes, sleep is a factor there. I just don't like blaming dopamine deficiency. Why is the dopamine deficient? Dopamine deficiency is not a root cause. But anyways, sleep disorders are widespread in children who suffer from ADHD. A study investigated the long-term intake of melatonin and its effects on children with ADHD. According to parents, 88% of the children treated showed a reduction in their sleep problems. In addition, 71 reported an improvement in day-to-day behavior, and 61% reported an improvement in mood. All of those results are good. These are actually very impressive results for one single substance without other lifestyle changes. I am impressed with this. I just don't like that other things are left out of the conversation. I know this book tried to jam in a bunch of different diseases. Like obviously, we're going through them now. It's a lot. It's hard to fit all that into a book and give all the other background information on these problems. I understand they're just focusing on sleep and melatonin, but there's more to health than sleep. It's a very important aspect. It's just one aspect, though. Moving on to schizophrenia, which is one of the most serious and debilitating neuropsychiatric disorders. Symptoms include hallucinations, emotional disorders, and decreased motor skills. A number of factors are believed to influence this, including a disorder of neurotransmitters, the messengers in the brain that normally transmit signals to nerve cells. Studies on patients detected changes in the brains themselves. And schizophrenia is another neuropsychiatric disorder found to be associated with disturbed circadian rhythms and decreasing melatonin levels. It is therefore assumed that melatonin could help in the treatment of the disease. In addition, the hormone could increase the effect of antipsychotic drugs and reduce their side effects. Many chronobiological studies conclude that a disturbance of the circadian rhythm may be partly responsible for the effects of this physical disorder. A study with patients of schizophrenia used melatonin in combination with a popular antipsychotic drug. Another patient group who participated in the same study also received this drug, but instead of melatonin, a placebo was administered. Those who received melatonin experienced fewer side effects, such as weight gain, and a lower PANSS, PANSS, a value that measures the severity of schizophrenia symptoms. And I mentioned this earlier, but I really wish these trials were conducted not with two groups of people who are both on an antipsychotic drug, and one of them's given melatonin, one of them's given a placebo on top of that. I really wish they, gave them a B complex, for example, because schizophrenia, to me, is a severe B vitamin deficiency. Probably several of them. Dr. Carl Pfeiffer was a very famous guy who used nutrients to treat people. In orthomolecular medicine, they call it, when you use nutrients as medicine. He believed that it was primarily a B12 deficiency. Others believe that it's primarily a B3 deficiency, niacin. I like to simplify it and just say it's probably a widespread B vitamin deficiency. Here I have a reference from the journal Biological Psychiatry from 1983. A lot of the stuff is not new here. This has been known for a long time. There's an account of how 500 milligrams of B6, which is a big dose, pyridoxine here again, just like it helped with seizures. The 500 milligrams of B6 were effective in treating an acutely schizophrenic patient who did not respond to other psychotropic medications. Folic acid deficiency can produce minor and major mental problems. Folic acid is another B vitamin. And mood changes, including depression, schizophrenia, and dementia. And large doses of folic acid have even been shown to improve the condition of certain congenital forms of mental retardation. Powerful stuff there. An even older reference here from 1966 in the International Journal of Neurochemistry and Psychiatry stated that schizophrenics appear to need much more vitamin C than do other people. They needed between 10 and 30 grams of vitamin C before they began excreting traces in their urine, indicating they had received enough vitamin C to saturate the tissues. And that was 10 times as much vitamin C as a control group of normal subjects. Could do a whole episode on schizophrenia here, but there is other studies showing improvement for schizophrenia and vitamin C. This is from the Nutrition Report in 1990, where 1 gram per day of vitamin C significantly improved depressive, manic, and paranoid symptoms. 8 grams a day improved 10 out of the 13 patients. And they used high doses here to improve several patients. Some of them were already on drugs for schizophrenia, weren't showing improvements. And even one of them got a full remission within 1 week with 2 to 6 grams of vitamin C. Even have a reference here about glycine, an amino acid, being used in high doses can, in some cases, cure schizophrenia. They use the word cure there. This is from 2017. It's a review of glycine in the journal Oxidative Medicine and Cellular Longevity. Magnesium's involved again. And I'm going to move on because I could talk for hours about schizophrenia, but I do also want to comment that I have attempted to deal with several schizophrenics. The problem is, if you're talking to a schizophrenic person yourself, good luck, right? Obviously, they're a bit all over the place. And it's not like we see a schizophrenic every day, but I've seen plenty of them or talked to plenty of them, done our little intake form with them with the questionnaire. All of them eat 100% junk food. Nearly all of them are self-admitted alcoholics or drug addicts. And if you just go look at any homeless person on the street who's yelling at the garbage can or something, his pants are hanging around his knees. He's clearly not all the way there. Some doctors might give him a different diagnosis. I would just call it schizophrenic. You're probably going to see a soda in their hand or a beer in their hand or vodka or sherry or alcohol, soda pop, bags of chips. It's 100% junk food. You'll never see a schizophrenic person who eats good food, ever. Because if they did, they wouldn't be schizophrenic anymore. And maybe I'm being a little bit too severe by saying all of them eat junk food. Okay, maybe there are some who eat real food, sure. Then they have nutrient deficiencies. Schizophrenics are fairly famous for not taking their drugs, their psychiatric drugs. Don't really know why. They don't want to be sedated, I guess. But especially the ones that I've dealt with, that's a very, very common theme. They say, no, I don't want to take those drugs. Remember, paranoia is part of the syndrome here. At least that's one good thing going for them. They don't want to take pharmaceutical drugs. But yeah, I've never seen one who didn't live on junk food 100%, didn't have raging blood sugar problems, obviously signified by the addiction to sugar drinks and alcohol. Very obvious nutrient deficiencies. I've also never seen one that didn't have severe digestive problems. I would attribute most of that to eating gluten because they eat 100% junk food, and much of that is gluten. But these clues are what lead me to believe it's B vitamin deficiency. Because if you have a digestion problem, you have a B vitamin deficiency by default. Your probiotics make B vitamins for you, and we get more B vitamins in food. But if you don't have a healthy digestive system, you will not be making enough B vitamins. This is important for all mental health, by the way. I know most people listening here will not have schizophrenia, but if you have any mental health problem, all of this is relevant. Schizophrenia is just an extreme mental health problem. And this is what leads me to hone in on niacin specifically, because niacin deficiency used to be called pellagra, which is characterized by the 4 Ds, they call it: dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and death. Not necessarily in that order. Dermatitis, skin problem. Nutrient deficiencies and usually a digestion problem is the cause of dermatitis and other skin problems. Diarrhea, obviously, digestive problem, usually caused by foods directly. But if you just have the deficiency by itself, like you can do this to animals, this is how they figured it all out. You can just take niacin away, they will get dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and then they will die. The 4 Ds. To me, that's schizophrenia. Other B vitamins are involved too, other nutrients are involved too, but it's the B vitamins that can act very, very quickly. A B vitamin deficiency can ruin your life very, very quickly. Whereas a lot of mineral deficiencies, like selenium, for example, they could take years to really creep up. Like if you've been taking selenium as a supplement and you stop taking it tomorrow, it's going to take months, maybe years for you to really see symptoms of that because you maintain a bit in your blood. Your blood level will go down slowly over time. It's true with chromium as well. It's true with many other minerals. But B vitamins are used rapidly. We use them in metabolism. We use them to digest food. We use them to create energy in our cells. They're used, they're burned, they're gone. If they're not replenished, you can have deficiency symptoms in days, a week. Big problems quickly from B vitamin deficiencies. And big problems could mean symptoms of dementia, symptoms of paranoia, symptoms of weird craving behaviors and impulsive behaviors, all stuff that's typical of schizophrenia. And yes, when all that is going on, of course they're not sleeping correctly. Of course their body's not producing melatonin correctly, dopamine, and whatever else is being connected. Of course all of that is off. But now you know that the typical clinical picture of schizophrenia to me is somebody who's addicted to junk food and has severe nutrient deficiencies and is pretty easily corrected if they will cooperate. Which again, that's the main problem actually in dealing with schizophrenics. It's not that their program is hard, it's that they probably just won't do it. And most of the time, I am actually talking to somebody else. My son has schizophrenia. My brother has schizophrenia. I'm talking to a third party. Good luck to that third party in getting that schizophrenic person to actually do the program. That's the biggest problem, is lack of cooperation. So schizophrenics always have bad skin or bad digestion, and usually both. Those are the obvious symptoms to me. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, there is one case that comes to mind who I don't think is a raging alcoholic. I don't think he's on any drugs. And from what he says, he tries to eat well, but he has an excuse that he lives at home. This is a young man who lives at home. He doesn't have control over what he eats. And honestly, I would look up his questionnaire, but our conversation is so full of long, rambly paragraphs that I can't even understand, that it would take me forever to scroll up and even find what he said originally. Because I've been talking to this guy for like 3 years, maybe 4 years, maybe even more than that. And it's so frustrating. Honestly, dealing with schizophrenics is so frustrating. Especially this case, because if he's not an alcoholic, he's not on drugs, and he is trying to eat well, and he's at least cognizant enough to reach out to me for help, then you would think that he would be able to actually take the action and do it. So what? You live at home. Your parents put gluten on your plate, don't eat it. He's in the Middle East, actually, so less likely to be eating potato chips and soda pops and all that stuff. I know it's still out there, but go to a traditional Middle Eastern home, they probably have dates and figs, and they like meat and rice. It's by no means the worst diet in the world. Just don't eat the gluten on the plate. That's it. And in his case, I know he's in the Middle East. It's going to cost more to get our supplements there, but he doesn't even need our supplements. Like, ours are the only ones that have all 90 essential nutrients. And I don't know exactly what deficiencies he has, but we should assume that there's many deficiencies there. But I told him, if there's only one thing that you can do, go buy some B vitamins. And of course, he's got excuse after excuse after excuse for years. Oh, I don't have any money, can't afford it, they don't sell them near me. Figure it out, honestly. This is one of the problems with mental illness in general. I know this is not a mental illness episode, but you gotta take responsibility. You gotta do the things that are good for you. You don't have any money. In 3+ years, you haven't been able to get $20, $60 for like a great B vitamin complex, high doses. $60? Probably one bottle would have done the trick of a B complex. Can't get some probiotics? You can't eat some fermented foods? Your parents won't do any of this for you? I'm sorry to tell you that you have bad parents. But using that as an excuse is not going to get you very far. And by the way, his parents probably aren't even bad parents. It's just that if he speaks to them like he speaks to me, they probably can't even understand what he's saying. He sounds like a crazy person. And I've actually yelled at him a few times in text, not in person here, but I've said, man, I have no idea what you're saying. I've already told you what to do. It's very basic. You come back with excuse after excuse. What do you want me to tell you? I can only tell you the same thing a few times before I start to get frustrated. And we've been talking for years here. Told him the only reason I haven't blocked him is because he clearly needs help. And I'm here to help him, but what can I do if you're not going to do anything? You got to do it. You can hear how frustrated I am with this. Because he is the only case that doesn't fit the pattern that I normally see. Again, 100% processed junk foods, alcoholic, drug addict. You're still living at home, which means you're not bad enough to be kicked out yet, which happens to many of these people. People can't deal with them, so they kick them out. In the old days, we'd send them to an institution. Now we don't have institutions, so all these people just are on the street. Most homeless people that you see, drug addicts, alcoholics, symptoms of schizophrenia and other dementias. The mainstream world just sums it up to, oh, it's mental illness. Well, what exactly does that mean? To me, it means multiple nutrient deficiencies and consistent intake of 100% processed foods. Too much sugar and alcohol. It's a very simple picture. And P.S., I believe this is why most of the research on schizophrenia is earlier. It's from the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, because that's when we still had mental institutions where you could actually control it and say, oh, we're just going to give them some B12 and see what happens. We're going to give them some B complex, see what happens. We're going to remove this from their diet, see what happens. You can't do that anymore because they're not in institutions anymore. They're running rampant on the street. Good luck recruiting schizophrenics for a voluntary trial of vitamins. Big problem here, and society is not addressing it at all by letting these people out on the streets. And now many of these places like California, Oregon, Washington, other liberal cities are no longer punishing them for petty crimes, so they can't even go to jail In jail, they'll actually get better foods than they will on the street. It's not good food by any means, but it's a better diet than on the street. And if they did actually want to help them, even if they wanted to use their antipsychotic drugs, you can do it in a more controlled environment in jail. And if they wanted to give them vitamins and actually solve the problem, they could do that as well because it's a controlled environment. But on the streets, they just do more and more drugs, drink alcohol, smash people's windows and steal stuff, get arrested, get released the same day. It's terrible. It's making the problem much worse. It is better to put them in an institution, even if you're not going to give them vitamins. Getting a little bit too political here, but this schizophrenia problem is huge. It's way, way understated. These people are way, way underdiagnosed. They're brushed aside as just mental illness without any attempt to actually help these people. And putting them in work programs is not going to help if they're schizophrenic because they're not going to listen. They're not going to do it. They just want to drink alcohol and eat processed foods. And you need to break these behaviors. And you need mega doses of nutrients to rectify these behaviors and these cravings. And without a controlled environment, it's just not going to happen. They're going to die on the streets, is the truth. These days, even faster because they're doing fentanyl too. Okay, moving on in the book here to something less serious, but that can be just as debilitating. Headaches. Migraines. The symptoms of a severe migraine can spread throughout the whole body. Nausea, vomiting, severe fatigue, and a high sensitivity to light and noise. It usually helps the affected person to stay in dark rooms in order to alleviate the discomfort, which in the worst case can last not only hours but days. For the many people affected, migraine drugs have a number of side effects, such as dizziness, irregular heartbeats, and diarrhea. These drugs can trigger a negative cycle for these people, making it impossible for them to pursue their usual everyday life during this time, and the quality of life is severely impaired. Anyone who's had a headache knows it's very hard to enjoy life when you've got a headache. Very hard to get any work done, hang out with your friends and loved ones. You don't want to do anything. You just want to be left alone in the dark. Numerous studies have shown that migraines can be successfully treated by melatonin. The exact mechanism is not known at the moment, but there are many connections between circadian rhythm and this type of headache. Most people who suffer from migraines get them at about the same time each day, which is something I did not know, suggesting a circadian component. An older study investigated the relationship between sleep disorders and migraine attacks and found that 79% of the migraine attacks among study participants were preceded by a sleepless night. 79% of the migraine attacks were preceded by a sleepless night. The use of melatonin provides a very positive double effect for patients suffering from both symptoms. It prevents migraines and simultaneously promotes a healthy sleep-wake cycle. Another study has shown that sleep quality can also affect the frequency of migraine attacks. Researchers observed that a group of poor sleepers suffered significantly more frequently from migraines than comparison groups. Yet another study has shown that melatonin has an excellent effect in the prevention of migraine. Subjects were given 3 milligrams of melatonin, not a huge dose, 25 grams of amitriptyline, which is a common anti-migraine agent, or a placebo administered for 12 weeks. The result? Melatonin is as effective as amitriptyline and causes no side effects. Melatonin studies have also shown promise for treating so-called cluster headaches, which occur spontaneously. Cluster headaches are characterized by strong, one-sided headaches in the area of the eye and temple. Tearful eyes or a runny nose are typical symptoms. The pain reaches its maximum after about 20 minutes and will decrease after a few hours. The affected are often symptom-free until the attacks recur. In the worst case, they can last for weeks, usually with a few attacks daily. As with migraines, researchers also linked cluster headaches to a disturbed sleep-wake rhythm and the pain attacks that occur. Lack of melatonin can lead to nocturnal pain or even pain during the day. In some patients, the frequency of headaches was significantly reduced with the help of melatonin. There are many mechanisms that may be responsible for the positive effect of melatonin. On the one hand, there is an anti-inflammatory effect. On the other hand, it inhibits the excessive release of dopamine, stabilizes the cell membrane, and promotes the release of GABA, the most important neurotransmitter of the brain. In addition, melatonin acts as a protector against free radicals and regulates the vascular nerves and thus the blood flow. And I'm not going to rant too long about headaches, but just in my experience, migraines are usually caused by food. It's usually a food allergy, we would say. And the most common is gluten. But it could also be dairy. It could just be processed food in general. It's a very, very common result that when we get people off of processed food and gluten specifically, they stop having migraines. Headaches could also be caused by dehydration, by the way, which is a lack of water-soluble nutrients like salt, calcium, magnesium, potassium. This is usually pretty easy to get rid of, especially if they happen all the time, just with our basic program here. But I agree with what they're saying here because we've all probably gotten a headache from staying out too late, being overworked, just being exhausted in general, which kind of goes hand in hand with lack of sleep, lack of melatonin. And if I ever get a headache, that's the cause, and I know that's the cause. Moving on to chronic pain. Fibromyalgia is a chronic pain disorder that affects approximately 4% of the population, women in particular. The word fibromyalgia is a combination of the Latin word fibra, or fibrous, and the Greek words myos, muscle, and algos, pain. So it's muscle fiber pain. And in fact, muscle, tendon, and ligament pain are all main symptoms of this disease. The other symptoms include fatigue, depression, anxiety, insomnia, and morning stiffness. Some also experience cardiovascular disorders, balance impairment, and abnormal gastrointestinal activity. Patients also reported degradation of their memory and cognitive functions. Studies have shown that fibromyalgia patients have low serotonin and melatonin levels. Numerous studies deal with the relationship between melatonin and pain. Findings suggest that melatonin is not only the hormone that helps guide our innate circadian rhythm and our biological 24-hour clock, but also serves as a regulator for pain signals. The hormone acts indirectly on the so-called opioid receptors. These are the same receptors on which many painkillers act. In a series of trials, the use of melatonin significantly improved a variety of fibromyalgia symptoms. Patients were given melatonin daily for 6 weeks. One group received melatonin alone, the other group in combination with a conventional drug prescribed for fibromyalgia. In both groups, the symptoms improved significantly. And I am going to do a fibromyalgia chronic fatigue episode very soon. Stay tuned for that. Not going to rant here, just gotta say that multiple nutrient deficiencies are present in every single case of fibromyalgia. And there are other things that can contribute as well. I will go into it in that next episode. And yeah, I'm sure sleep is a problem here, and I'm sure that melatonin can help because studies show that it can help, which is great. And now we move on to cancer. Save the best for last here. Normal cells grow and die due to very rhythmic processes, which are defined by so-called watch genes. When these genes mutate or otherwise function abnormally, cells can grow uncontrolled and kill healthy cells in the vicinity. Studies on melatonin as an anti-cancer hormone have existed for over 50 years. All of these studies show that the receptor MTL1 is mainly involved. Melatonin has a direct influence on tumor growth and, in parallel, has an antioxidant effect. Studies recommend that melatonin, due to its non-toxic properties, low costs, and easy and fast availability, should be taken into consideration in clinical treatment. Recent studies suggest that melatonin inhibits the growth of the tumor, while alleviating the negative side effects of some cancer therapies. It has been shown several times that people who work at night instead of sleeping show a higher risk of cancer, which is why the World Health Organization classified shift work as a carcinogen. Studies repeatedly establish a connection between night shift work and cancer. Although the link between an interrupted circadian rhythm and cancer is unambiguous, the mechanism of the increased risk of cancer has so far been unknown. A new analysis of chronobiology studies suggests that melatonin interferes with cancer at its foundation by breaking the biochemical processes that cause tumors to grow. When laboratory animals suffering from tumors were supplied with melatonin, tumor growth slowed considerably. In addition, studies show that human cancer patients can better tolerate other treatments when they take melatonin. For years, science has devoted itself to the effects of melatonin on a variety of cancers. The common conviction is that melatonin is an intelligent killer of cancer cells. It protects the healthy cells from attacks and triggers self-destruction in cancer cells. Melatonin has long proved itself to help with the toxic side effects of chemotherapy and radiation. At the same time, it acts as an antioxidant and thus promotes the programmed death of cancer cells, or apoptosis. A study investigated tumor patients who were suffering from lung, breast, stomach, brain, and neck cancer. One group was treated with melatonin in parallel to chemotherapy, and the other group was treated exclusively with chemotherapy. The result was that a 1-year survival rate and tumor decline were significantly higher in patients treated with melatonin, as opposed to those who received chemotherapy alone. A few years later, a similar study with tumor patients came to the same conclusion. The decline in tumor and the 2-year survival rate were significantly higher in those patients who were also treated with melatonin in parallel to chemotherapy. These studies clearly show that melatonin can increase the efficacy of any cancer treatment. As a natural killer, melatonin plays an important role in the function of cells. It inhibits the uncontrolled proliferation of cells, thus reducing tumor growth, and can even prevent tumor formation by activating the lymphocytes, the white blood cells. Melatonin also protects against common consequences of chemotherapy or radiation, such as nausea and vomiting, low blood pressure, and lack of strength by stimulating the immune system. Melatonin also relieves inflammation of the oral mucosa and damage to the mucosa or stomach lining, intestines, probiotics. All this stuff is very common side effects of chemotherapy because chemotherapy targets the fast replicating cells, which includes our blood cells, our immune cells, our digestive cells, the skin lining in the digestive tract, and the probiotics. These are all fast-growing cells, so they're hit hard by chemotherapy. And that's why digestive complaints are one of the main things that happens with chemotherapy. So melatonin relieves the inflammation of the oral mucosa. It also reduces harmful effects on the heart and helps to reduce blood glucose and insufficient numbers of blood platelets after chemotherapy. Studies also show that melatonin not only inhibits tumor growth and the proliferation of cancer cells, but also suppresses the so-called Warburg effect. This is a theory of physician and biochemist Otto Warburg, who observed that glucose metabolism plays a major role in the growth of tumor cells. If glucose is broken down in the body, lactate is formed. In a healthy person, it enters the mitochondria, where it provides energy. Unfortunately, this energy generation also produces free radicals that kill cells. And we've already heard how melatonin can mitigate that from happening. In tumor cells, the mitochondria do not absorb the lactate, which means that they produce less energy but also no free radicals. The reduced energy production is then compensated by an increased sugar consumption of these cells, according to Warburg's assumption. Scientists have shown that a suppressed melatonin release at night due to nocturnal light sources can favor the Warburg effect, and thus the development and growth of tumors. On the other hand, an evening dose of melatonin suppressed the Warburg effect. Now to breast cancer. Scientists have long been convinced that the disturbance of the day-night rhythm can have an impact on the development of breast cancer. A study with women who have been working in shifts for more than 20 years and suffering from sleep disorders came to the conclusion that they are more likely to develop breast cancer than women in occupations with regulated working hours and normal sleep. A study of women's sleep and lighting habits were evaluated, including their sleep quality, bedtimes, falling asleep with either television or reading, and the type and intensity of the lighting. The women who slept longer and in the darkened room and read a book before sleeping with a special reading lamp developed breast cancer less frequently. The influence of light and physical activity on melatonin production was investigated by an older study and concluded that regular, even moderate movement during the day positively influences the melatonin level and thus has a protective influence on breast cancer risk. Melatonin also affects the activity of estrogens on tumor cells. Remember that about 85% of breast cancers are estrogen receptor positive, meaning they're stimulated by estrogen. So melatonin also affects the activity of estrogens on tumor cells, and also reduces the aggressiveness of the tumor and the side effects of radiotherapy or chemotherapy. Scientists have shown that melatonin can also prevent cell migration and invasion. This protects our body from the spread of lethal tumor cells into new tissue. Melatonin can also positively influence the tumor weight loss and thus tumor size, a prerequisite required by many therapists before any chemotherapy or surgery is performed. So basically, if your tumor is not big enough, a lot of times they're not going to cut it out. A study showed that melatonin not only inhibits the growth of breast cancer cells, but also the formation and growth of new blood vessels, or angiogenesis, or neoangiogenesis. This is an important finding because these vessels provide the tumor with oxygen and nutrients and thus contribute to its growth. And if you're more interested in this, I highly recommend the episode I did with Dr. Wendy Sellens called Breast Thermography Revolution and her book of the same title, because she's been tracking this for many years, how certain foods and supplements increase vascularity in the breast, which is one of the risk factors for cancer. And many alternative cancer doctors do believe that getting rid of this vascularity is key to treating the cancer, because the cancer creates its own new blood vessels to feed it. And I'm not going to go deep into cancer here. I do have another cancer episode. It's called The Truth About Cancer. It's a pretty long episode. I cover my basic thoughts there. Cancer is complicated. There's going to be nutrient deficiencies involved. There's going to be some kind of antagonist involved. All the other lifestyle factors that we've mentioned before. There is no one single cause of cancer, and there also is no one single strategy to reverse it. You want to use a combination of strategies because it's going to be a combination of things that caused it in the first place. Melatonin also reduces uncontrolled cell division, the so-called telomerase activity, and the uncontrolled spread of cancer cells into other tissues. Increased telomerase activity allows the tumor cell to constantly divide and penetrate into other tissues. Melatonin is one of the few substances that can reduce this activity, especially in tumor cells, thus reducing the formation of metastasis when cancer spreads. What is also underlined in the study is that melatonin supports programmed cell death or apoptosis, alleviates the serious side effects of chemotherapeutic agents, and simultaneously increases the efficacy of chemotherapy and radiation therapy. The authors of the study conclude that its broad spectrum of effects makes melatonin a treatment agent that can achieve very positive effects in breast cancer treatment. As a pre-treatment of chemotherapy or radiotherapy, so something you take before the therapy, melatonin can significantly sensitize breast cancer cells, according to a recent study. Melatonin reduces the activity and expression of certain proteins by about 50%, thereby reducing the amount of bioactive estrogens that promote tumor growth. And melatonin also demonstrated an excellent efficacy after breast cancer surgeries and improved patient sleep quality, an important effect for the regeneration phase and the healing process of women. Moving on to colon cancer. In colorectal cancer, good results can be reported with a parallel melatonin input. In one study, colorectal cancer patients were treated with chemotherapy combined with daily melatonin. Despite low doses, chemotherapy showed a higher efficacy due to melatonin. At this point, we shouldn't be surprised. That seems to be the normal outcome here. It improves the outcome and reduces the toxicity or improves the efficacy of whatever treatment you're using. A clinical study investigated the influence of melatonin on chemotherapy and other colon cancer patients. The scientists concluded that melatonin significantly increases the chemotherapeutic agent of 5-fluorouracil. Don't know if I said that correctly. 5-fluorouracil. I think that's how you say it, which is usually used in colorectal cancer. And skin cancer. Melatonin, as the perfect body-borne antioxidant, can become a key figure in the fight against skin cancer, as is confirmed time and time again in many studies. Melatonin receptors found in our skin and their cells fulfill important functions such as cell regeneration. In addition, melatonin provides good protection against free radicals by UV radiation. I would argue with UV being a factor here. The longest lived populations, most of them live on mountains, which is higher radiation exposure, higher UV. And I agree with those who speculate that that means that they get more vitamin D year-round, even in the winter, than they would at sea level. And that's one of the reasons why they're so healthy and long-lived. But okay, can protect against free radicals by UV radiation. Scientists have long been concerned with the relationship between circadian rhythm and melanoma. Melanoma is the most aggressive skin cancer, by the way. Studies with firefighters, flight attendants, pilots, and nurses confirm that melanomas are increasingly found in people who do shift work. A disturbed day-night rhythm has a negative effect on the repair mechanisms, which follow a circadian rhythm and depend on melatonin signals. Many studies show that melatonin can help protect against the serious effects of UV radiation, but only if it is applied as a cream before sunbathing. It does not have any effect when it is used only afterward. And just a few cancers left here. Lung cancer. Studies show a correlation with a disturbed day-night rhythm. For example, researchers have demonstrated that jet lag can promote the development and progression of lung tumors. It is mainly two genes that play a tumor-suppressing role in the cells. However, they cannot fulfill this important function if the circadian rhythm is disturbed. Uncontrolled cell growth is the result, a fatal situation for the healthy cells that can no longer fight against the tumor cells. The first clinical studies on melatonin in lung cancer therapy suggest a therapeutic benefit, but they say we need more studies. Stomach cancer. Similar results have also been achieved in patients with gastric cancer, where melatonin shows its great anti-cancer effect. It inhibits the spread of lethal tumor cells, and thus of metastases, or spread, and promotes programmed cell death. In an experiment in which tumor cells were treated with melatonin, the behavior of the malignant cells was directly affected. It not only inhibited the viability of the cells, but also hindered cloning and spreading into healthy tissue. Again, the researchers strongly recommend that melatonin be considered as an effective anti-tumor agent or supporting therapy. I think that last study there was in petri dishes. I think it was in vitro. Prostate cancer affects more than 13% of men and is thus considered a very common cancer. It is. It's one of the most common cancers that we deal with. I focus on heavy digestive support, lots of probiotics, normal high doses of nutrients that we would use with any cancer person, all the normal food advice. And by the way, I do have a book called Fake Diseases. It does have a cancer chapter in it. You can find that book and all my books on my website, notusbooks.org. You can also find the free versions of that book. Video and audio versions are free. And I am getting ready for a big second edition. And in the cancer chapter, I will add hydrogen water. I will also add removing all dental fillings and root canals. And there's a few more anti-cancer compounds that I'll give a highlight to. But for now, I do stand by everything in that chapter. I would just add a bit more to it. You got to hit cancer hard. You can't just do one thing. You got to do everything that you can. Prostate cancer appears to be associated with too little sleep. A study concluded that this was mainly true for men who had late-stage prostate cancer. Further, the investigation found that men who work in long and irregular shifts are more likely to develop prostate cancer. The relationship between circadian rhythm and prostate cancer is emphasized in a recently published study and underlines the extremely positive effects of melatonin parallel to radiotherapy or chemotherapy, both in terms of increased efficacy and reduced toxicity. The fluid of the prostate gland serves the transport of sperm and contains very high concentrations of glucose. An animal experiment found that melatonin inhibits the growth of the tumor, which is favored by the high glucose content of the glandular fluid, which is reminiscent of the Warburg effect, thus prolonging the mice's lives. In another animal experiment, melatonin increased the survival of mice with prostate cancer by 33%, regardless of whether the melatonin was administered at the beginning or during the advanced stage of the tumor. That's impressive. And that was all of the disease models in this book. So now we can talk a little bit about dosages and toxicity. And they say in the book, to date, there are no uniform guidelines for melatonin dosages for specific diseases. In the most diverse clinical trials published so far, researchers have used dosages of between half a milligram or less, or up to 25 milligrams or more. A very wide range that makes it difficult to compare the results. You'll notice we didn't mention doses for most of the episode here. But remember, at the very beginning, the guy who discovered melatonin, he took 100 grams and didn't get any negative effect except for extreme drowsiness. One study investigated whether an oral or IV administration of melatonin resulted in different serum levels. The result? There are no significant clinical differences, with the exception that in the IV administration, more melatonin was found in the blood than after oral administration, which makes sense. If melatonin is used as a tablet or capsule, about 30 to 40% is absorbed. After about 25 minutes, half of the melatonin taken as a pill is already broken down, so there is no longer any significant melatonin after approximately 2.5 hours. In the case of chronotherapy, where patients want to adjust their internal clock, melatonin amounts of half a milligram to 1 milligram are sufficient as fast-release dosage forms. A pulsatile administration, or pulse-like administration of up to 3 milligrams, was shown as effective. This applies to those who suffer from shift work and jet lag in particular. I didn't really understand that phrase there. Do they mean take like 1 milligram now and then one in an hour and one an hour later? It wasn't exactly clear how this pulsatile administration is actually carried out. The ideal time to take melatonin is around 30 minutes before bedtime, but always before midnight, so as not to cause any rhythm shifts. In the case of supporting therapies, such as those for a stroke or myocardial infarction, higher doses are required. In the earlier studies, quantities of up to 50 milligrams and more were used successfully as an immediate measure, and specifically as a fast-release form of melatonin. The administration took place immediately after the occurrence of the event, independent of the time of day. It is also advisable to use higher doses for concurrent therapy in tumor patients. Whether these are to be administered in the evening is still controversial, but likely. In the case of radiation therapy, doses of 15 milligrams need to be administered shortly before the treatment. Melatonin does not act as a classic hypnotic, so it's not like a regular sleeping pill, but it's a regulator of the sleep-wake rhythm. Hence, the effect is most accurately assessed when one is asked in the morning how restful their sleep was, and not how long it took to fall asleep or how often one woke up. Most melatonin preparations have either a fast or slow release of the hormone. A rapid release leads to a steep increase in melatonin levels, which falls again after 1 or 2 hours. People who take this type of supplement find that they become drowsy quickly, but have difficulty sleeping or simply fail to get their quality sleep. Slowly released melatonin takes hours to induce sleep and often does not decrease in the early morning hours. People who choose preparations that allow a slow release may have problems with falling asleep due to the initial low melatonin level, followed by difficulty waking up as the morning values are still unnaturally high. So you can either buy a fast release, slow release, or a timed release. And a timed release of melatonin is a supplement designed to release the hormone exactly in the amount that mimics a healthy natural melatonin level. It is released stepwise so that the melatonin level increases rapidly after the supplement has been taken and then remains at a high level for several hours. The values then fall off again quickly in the morning to allow a wake up. This mimics healthy, normal circadian rhythm cycles, which are also associated with a restful sleep. Now, the melatonin I've been using, it just says maximum strength. It doesn't say time release, slow release, or fast release on it. And timed release might say extended release on the package. And those are generally the more expensive ones, by the way. So my 10 cents a day might not be accurate when we're talking about timed release. But I do believe that it is okay to take rapid release if you have other good sleep hygiene habits, which we're going to get to in a minute. But to finish this segment off, although not too many studies on possible side effects are available, all studies show that melatonin is very well tolerated. A meta-analysis of several studies which administered predominantly 10 milligrams and more showed that the frequency and severity of reported adverse reactions were identical to those seen in patients who received a placebo. All previous studies lead to the conclusion that side effects may occur only if melatonin is taken incorrectly. This means that when melatonin is taken at the wrong time, one can become drowsy, leading to a decrease in concentration and possibly affecting visual acuity, symptoms that may occur with any sleep deficit. Intensive dreaming was also reported. Yeah, I've been experiencing intensive dreaming recently since I kicked my dose up to 10 milligrams. I was doing 5 milligrams before. I've definitely had more intense dreams. Not nightmares, though. Nightmares are usually an indication of a blood sugar problem, by the way. In very rare cases, a paradoxical effect of extreme insomnia occurs in patients. This is most likely due to contamination of the drug during preparation, which can cause allergies, but it has not yet been demonstrated. Intolerance of melatonin itself could also be the cause. Yeah, I agree. If you do get any, severe negative reaction, it's probably due to one of the other ingredients in the capsule or tablet or liquid. Extremely high doses have been administered in animal experiments and show the following. Melatonin is absolutely non-toxic. It is by no means carcinogenic, but rather has a positive effect in the fight against cancer. And melatonin has no negative effect on the fetus. All good to me. And they finish off the book here with some tips about perfect sleep hygiene. They say sleep 7 hours to stay healthy, not gain weight and become more intelligent. I would put a bit more flexibility in that. I stuck to the 7-8 hour rule for a long time, but I do believe that we can use more sleep. It's not a bad thing. Now, I'm personally physically incapable of sleeping that long, like 9 hours, unless I'm extremely, extremely exhausted. Normally, my body's going to wake me up at about 7 hours, regardless of what I do. But I already mentioned that women do need more sleep, and even teenagers need more sleep as well. So just don't think that it's a sickness if you're sleeping 9, 10, 11 hours. It might be if you're doing 11, but you might need it as well. You might be in a growth phase. Certain phases of a woman's menstrual cycle, she might feel like she needs more sleep. Just listen to your body. And of course, make sure to not eat processed foods and have a good supplementation program and all that stuff. So you can be sure that your oversleeping, if it is oversleeping, is not caused by those things, nutrient deficiencies and processed foods. Or drugs for that matter. Many pharmaceutical drugs can make you sleep way too much. So the 7 hour rule, I don't really like that. It's not really a one size fits all approach, especially in the differences between men and women and younger people and older people. But I would say at least 7 hours. Maybe they should have said at least 7 hours is a better rule of thumb. A lot of people think they're doing fine on 6 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep. I doubt it. Next, go to sleep at the same time every night. I already mentioned that. Very, very important to me. It's important in my life as well. Go to sleep at the same time every night. Wake up at the same time every morning. If you're trying to correct your sleeping patterns, do this. If you're staying up too late and you want to fix that, go to sleep at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. And if you don't fall asleep, just sit in bed. Read a book with red light or some special reading light. Or conversely, if you stay up till 3 in the morning every day, wake up at 7. You're going to be extremely tired and groggy that first day, but you should be tired enough by the next night where you're going to want to go to sleep earlier and do the same thing. Wake up at 7 again. Keep doing that until it's beaten in and it's automatic. Do not engage in excessive physical activity before going to bed. Yeah, that can keep you up, jacks you up. I know that even when I do like Zoom meetings and stuff later at night or podcasts later at night, I try not to, but sometimes I do. And it takes me, 2 or 3 hours to kind of wind down out of that. I'm all excited and, I'm in performance mode. I know it's not good for me to do that at night, and it keeps me up later. Eat at least 3 hours before going to bed. So 3 hours or more before going to bed. So do not eat within 3 hours of going to bed. This is very, very common advice and not very often followed. Do not eat at least 3 hours before going to bed and avoid heavy foods. And I would say avoid sugar as well. Let the evening end with quiet activities. Avoid sleeping pills. Already mentioned, sleeping pills disturb your melatonin. Avoid alcohol. Alcohol also interferes with melatonin and depletes many nutrients, especially those ones that you need to sleep, your B vitamins, your calcium, your magnesium, and so on. Do not expose yourself to blue light, like phones, tablets, or TV. Already mentioned this, already ranted about it. Put the phone down, turn it off a couple hours before you're ready to go to bed at least. Read a book instead, hang out, listen to some music. Draw a picture, play a board game with your family. Just turn off the devices, especially the ones that you hold close to your face. I think TV is not as much of a problem as the phones or the tablets, and I'm not going to rant much further on that. But this is all generally good advice. I would just go a bit further and say that blocking the light from your window might be important. I know at my house, I have a street light right outside the house, and the light comes right into my room. So I blocked that off with heavy curtains. You can buy blackout curtains. It really affected me. So block the light. I would say take everything electronic out of the room. If you use an EMF meter and walk around your house, you will find that your lamps, your light switches, your digital clock, everything that's plugged in is going to set the meter off, even if it's not on, even if the lamp is not turned on. It's giving out an EMF field. So get rid of the lamp by the bedside. If you have to have a digital clock, put it across the room. I personally removed everything from my room, all electronic devices. Nothing is plugged in, except for a fan on the other side of the room when it gets hot. I don't have AC. Again, the book did not mention this EMF stuff, but I'm mentioning it. Make sure that your bed is not next to an outlet, especially the head of your bed. Pull it to the other side of the room if you can. If not, pull it away from the wall at least a foot, 2 feet. The further you can get away from that outlet, the better it is. And I do actually recommend a grounding mat for the bed, which I already mentioned in my commercial. You can buy that for less than $100. Helped me a lot. And I do like to read before going to bed. Makes me tired. And I hope these tips helped you. I only saved a couple more sentences here to read to you, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about night shift and what I think we should do about it. The book ended off with sleep well. It's age-old wisdom. Sleep well. Get your beauty sleep. If you're a hustler, you need your sleep to hustle. If you're trying to lift weights and build muscle, you need a good sleep and rest days in order to grow. We need sleep to reset, to restore. It's very, very important. It's very, very underrated. If you want to live life to the fullest, a good sleep is required, in my opinion. And the scientific evidence suggests that a natural release of melatonin is a basic prerequisite for achieving an old age in full health without major diseases. And sleep disorders are still an underestimated and often trivialized national disease. I would agree. It's becoming an international disease as more and more people adapt our lifestyles, our busy culture, and definitely the addiction to social media and television and all this stuff make it an extremely widespread problem. Doesn't matter whether it's in people who are trying to be healthy or not. This is a problem that's affecting basically everyone. And I hope this episode has given you some clarity on the issue. I thought this was a pretty good episode. So quickly before going to the night shift conversation, there's a chart here in this book, which one thing stood out to me. They said that the creativity is at its peak between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. And that might be true. It might be true. But most of the night shift stuff that we're talking about or we're going to talk about has nothing to do with creativity. So, yeah, it might be true, but I always considered myself an artist. I would always describe myself as an artist, especially before I got into this business. And even though I was an insomniac, I can't say for sure that working late at night, like drawing and stuff late at night, was that much different from during the day. I find myself intellectually best in the morning. And on this chart here, it does say that you're fully fit and wide awake and your brain is most efficient between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m., noon. And I agree with that. I like to get my brain work done in the morning. I like to read first thing in the morning. I got to talk to customers and do all this stuff. In the morning is best. Afternoon, I get less and less good at what I do, basically. And I'm not going through the whole chart here, but they do say that the second peak of your energy is at 5 to 6 p.m., which is best for manual work. So, you get off work and you go and work on the car or work in the garage or something. Sounds about right to me. But I just wanted to bring up the creativity at its peak between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. because this is something I hear. And to me, it's pretty much an excuse. I usually hear this from artists. Oh, but I get my best work done at night. Well, you're just stuck on this schedule. How do you know? Get on a healthier schedule, and then maybe your best work is going to be done at 5 to 6 p.m. Maybe it's going to be in the morning. When I was most productive as an artist, I painted in the morning. Get my reading done, go right to work. But most of us are not creative workers in the strict sense, so it really doesn't matter. So I'm just removing that from the table as being a factor here when we're talking about shift work. So what do we do about shift work, individually and as a society? Well, first of all, I recognize that there are several things that should be done at night or that have to be done at night. For example, emergency workers. Yes, you need some emergency workers at their post at night. You need some firefighters on schedule, nurses, ambulance drivers, emergency healthcare workers. Obviously, if you get hit by a car at 1 a.m, you want to get some help. And if your house catches on fire at 3 a.m, you want to hope that there's firefighters on duty. And I live in a mining town, gold mining town. They mine 24/7. And that's not really a necessity, but these are big multi-billion-dollar projects and, they want to keep the production going. I understand it on a business level. Factories, a lot of them do the same thing. There's a lot of food factories, for example, that produce junk food primarily, like bagels for your coffee shops and grocery store. You go into the grocery store at 7 a.m., you wonder, how do they have fresh bread every day at 7 a.m.? How do they have fresh muffins? It's because there's food factories in most cities operating at night and truck drivers delivering that to the store before it opens, which is an industry I really don't think needs to exist. Honestly, you should be baking your own goods if you have baked goods, and you shouldn't be having those for breakfast anyways. All baked goods in every grocery store, it's always junk food. Even if it's gluten free, it's still junk food. And it's harming you. And yeah, it's just not a necessity, right? Bagels being fresh at 7 a.m. in the coffee shop is irrelevant to me if we shouldn't be eating bagels, especially not in the morning. You can make your own bagels, they'll be healthier. You can do it gluten free, but you still shouldn't have them in the morning. It's the worst time to have carbs in the morning. So there are quite a few night things that really don't need to exist. You know, there's a lot of trucks out there delivering Amazon goods because they promise 2-day shipping, and we as a society have become just spoiled and entitled to a lot of these instant services and expecting everything to be available 24/7, or just expecting our grocery store or coffee shop to have all these baked goods ready at 7 in the morning. This is entitlement. That's what it is. So it's not a necessity. Business will sell us what we want to buy. If you buy bagels at 7 in the morning, they're going to produce them. But we can change market behavior by changing the way that we spend our money. And I do believe that much of the 24-hour services that are available, including the emergency services already mentioned, are basically there just because of alcohol. Alcohol is a big problem in our modern world. It's been a big problem for hundreds of years. Why do you need emergency workers at 2 in the morning? Who do you think is getting injured at 2 in the morning? Primarily people who have been drinking. I worked night shift once. It was at Denny's, which is a popular American and Canadian all-day breakfast restaurant. I only lasted 2 days, one weekend, and I quit. Said, this is terrible. And yeah, a bunch of drunk people come in when the bars close, and that's what it is. That's the only reason that Denny's is open at night, is to service a bunch of drunk people from the bar. Bars close too, which is interesting. Bars don't stay open 24 hours. Maybe they do in some countries, but not in Canada. They cut you off. Places differ. Some places it's 1 a.m. is the latest they're allowed to serve alcohol. Sometimes it's 2 a.m. Sometimes it's 3 a.m. But my point is they actually cut it off. Now, I think 3 a.m. is unreasonable. I think bars should be closed at 12 or 1 a.m. Hopefully I don't sound like too much of a party pooper, but why should we have this whole set of the economy geared around alcohol? If you've ever been around drunk people in these bars and stuff, you know it's nothing but trouble. There's fights, people drinking and driving. Again, why do we need so many emergency services at night? Alcohol, primarily alcohol. Why do we need 24-hour convenience stores? Alcohol. Why should you be able to buy alcohol in the middle of the night? I live in a small town. There's 2 stores that are open 24 hours. One of them's a gas station. One of them's a small grocery store down the street from me. They don't need to exist like that. The grocery store only started its 24-hour policy recently. And I'm sure most of the customers they get at night are drug addicts or alcoholics. Not necessary. You can squeeze a few dollars out by selling them stuff, but we don't need to have an actual economy geared towards this. Gas stations, sure, especially on the road, trucking, all this stuff. But again, a lot of companies are geared on the 24-hour clock because of the high, unrealistic expectations of us consumers. I gotta have my stuff at 2-day shipping. And I travel long haul. I go across the continent regularly. I get it. But I'm not on the road at 1 a.m. I'm doing it within a normal workday. And when I stay at these little motels, I don't expect someone to be at the counter at 3 in the morning. The little motel I like staying in is it's about halfway from here to Detroit, Houston to Detroit. It's my normal route. It's in the middle of nowhere in Missouri. One guy runs it. He's got a little room behind the front desk where he sleeps. So when I go in at 5 in the morning, because I want a coffee, I pay for a room and a coffee, I'm waking him up. And it's not rude to me. I don't care if you're standing at attention at the desk. Like, you're there, there's a button I can hit, it wakes you up. I'm good with that. Whereas a lot of major hotels especially, yeah, they've got some bellboy standing there at 4 in the morning for no reason. Flights, they schedule flights at all times at night. Why? You don't have to do this. We've already seen that flight attendants and pilots are more susceptible to cancer and other problems. Like, why are industries doing this to their personnel? Nobody has to fly at 3 in the morning. You can schedule flights during the day. They're still going to be affected by the time zone changes, but again, just unrealistic, spoiled expectations from us here that is driving this. No one wants to fly at 3 in the morning anyway. And back to the alcohol thing again, yeah, cab drivers, Uber drivers, whatever, a lot of this stuff, these overnight workers are only catering to drunk people. And to me, that's unacceptable. Why are we promoting this behavior? Why are we making it easier for them? And when I used to drink, by the way, as a kid, I quit when I was like 16 years old, and I never got into a heavy drinking phase beyond that. In fact, I didn't drink at all for many, many years. But my buddies and I used to drink in the park, like I just don't get it. Like, why do you need a bar open? Why when I bring this up ever is there a complaint? Like, oh, but I have the right to do it. You don't have the right to do anything. Businesses can close when they want to close. They don't have to serve you. They're only serving you to get more money from you at night. And it's normal culture, especially young people culture. It's normal to like start getting ready at like 9 p.m. and you go to the bar at like 11 p.m. Like, that's stupid. Kick it back a bit earlier. Let the bar close at a reasonable time so the bartender can go home to his family at a reasonable time, 11 p.m., 12 p.m. And if you're not done drinking by then, you have a problem anyways. And if you still need to drink, do it on the street with the rest of the losers out there, or go to the park. I know drinking in the park's illegal in many places, but many places it's not. Do it in your house. Do it in your own house. Oh, you don't want a bunch of drunk people in your own house? Yeah, well, a bunch of drunk people are a problem, no matter where you find them. In most cases, it's loud, it's messy, could be violent, could be accidents, could be sicknesses, alcohol poisoning, all kinds of stuff that are the reason why so many emergency workers need to be on shift. And that's the only reason there's cab drivers at 3 in the morning. It's the only reason that people are delivering Uber Eats at 3 in the morning. And why any restaurants are open is to service drunk people, and I think it's stupid. Most small towns, again, you're not going to find this. Even here where I am right now, I spend half my time in Houston and half my time up north in Canada. Here where we are in the suburbs of Houston, nothing's open late at night. Even the gas stations are not open late at night. We don't even have any convenience stores around here. But nothing's open. Grocery stores not open. And I mean past like 11 o'clock. Everything's closed. And you just have to deal with it and adapt to it. And buy your stuff during the day like normal people. And if you do fall down the stairs while you're going down to get a glass of milk at 2 in the morning, then yeah, there's emergency services. But the person falling down the stairs at 2 in the morning is probably going to be drunk, honestly, in most cases. I'm saying remove alcohol from the equation, which is up to us as a culture. Reduce or remove the alcohol, and a lot of this stuff just goes right away. We don't need work at night, for the most part. And in businesses like the giant mining operation in my town, I get it, they want to function 24 hours, so okay, here's another solution. Instead of putting people on 12-hour rotating shifts, where they do like 2 weeks day shift and then 2-week night shift, it's really hard to adapt to that. Keep steady shifts, and instead of doing like 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. or 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., cut that in half. Have the shift end at midnight. Have the shift end at 2 in the morning, say, which is it's late, but the person who gets off at 2 can still get to sleep by like 3 or 4 in the morning, it's more reasonable. It's still dark out at least. Big problem getting off work and it's light out. I know a lot of shift workers because almost my whole town works in the mine. It hits them really hard. And when you get off work when the sun is shining in the morning, it's tough. And you should black out your room, and you should take melatonin too, in my opinion, and in the book's opinion. But I used to work at a gym in the evening shift. The gym closed at midnight, so I would get off at midnight. And I could be asleep by 1:32 in the morning, which is late, but it's easy for me to do as a young man, which many of these jobs are ran by young people. Midnight was not bad for me. I enjoyed that shift, actually. And then we closed and we opened again at 5 a.m. I see like 24-hour gyms and stuff, and who needs to work out at 3 in the morning? Come on. This is an unrealistic expectation from the market. Opening at 5:30 is totally reasonable, even for the super early risers. And we did have some people complain that were like, I wish you opened at 5. Too bad. And I'm not expecting the mines to shut down. I know they got to keep running. But again, if you split the shift in half, at least the guy doing the late shift can go to sleep before the sun comes up. And at least the guy coming in for the morning shift, it's mostly guys in the mines, guy coming in for the morning shift can get a bit of sleep before he comes in. If your shift starts at 2 a.m., you could go to sleep at 7 p.m., 8 p.m. This is not ideal. It's not a perfect sleep pattern, but it's better than working 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And we've already seen how overnight shift workers can make more mistakes. I'm sure anybody who's worked night shifts knows you can make more mistakes. Nobody adapts to it perfectly. And in mining, it's a very dangerous job as well. And I just popped this into Google to see what comes up, but they say here, the first thing here on an article about mine workers and fatigue and circadian rhythms, that 65% of truck driving accidents, this is for open pit mining, are fatigue related. Well, yeah. So I get it. Mining is important business, but I know also they pay out a lot in death claims and insurance and stuff. And maybe those prices would go down if people didn't work night shift. Or, maybe shut down for like 4 hours. Again, the shift ends at midnight and then they shut down for 4 hours. And then the first shift of the day is at 4 a.m. It's just a 4 hour window there, but it's going to get rid of the worst of it. It's going to get rid of most of the accidents. It's going to allow people in both shifts to get at least somewhat of a more normal sleep pattern. And again, I know a lot of jobs are unnecessary like this. Like, it just doesn't need to be done all day. In the past, it wasn't done. Factories were not running 24/7. This is a modern thing. My dad worked night shift, by the way. He was an audio technician at the CBC in Canada, big television and radio station. He was in radio. I used to go in with him when I was a kid sometimes. And they were mostly working on commercials and stuff. Like, it's not live recording. They're recording commercials. Let's do another take. That one sounded good. Doing the editing, doing the mixing. And I even thought back then, like, why does this need to be done at night? Just didn't make sense. They have tons of different studios. Why can't they just use a studio to do this during the day? Why does it have to be at night? Never got a good answer for that. I'm sure they could figure out the programming without having a night shift. And if one of your parents works night shift, by the way, you probably don't see them very often. Hardly ever saw my dad. It's not a good thing. I know we've got to feed the family here, but we don't have to run our society in ways that impacts us so severely. Night shift is one of those things that is detrimental for anyone who works it. Talk to any nurse, doctor, miner, any shift worker. They're all going to tell you how hard it is. Some of them are necessary. Power plants is another example that comes to mind. A power plant needs to run 24/7. I get it. But you can adjust the shifts to make it easier on the workers, shorten the shifts that are at night. And I don't know who came up with the rotating shift concept, but it seems to be brutally difficult for people to adjust to those shifts. And my dad used to say that too. He said, I'd rather work night shift consistently than flip-flop back and forth. It's harder on the body to regain a new circadian rhythm every 2 weeks. And on a personal level, we don't have to take these jobs. I get it. You really want to be a firefighter. You really want to be an emergency doctor. Or you really want to work at the power plant. It can be a good job. These can be good, stable jobs. But you should factor in the cost to your health. Doing what I'm doing right now is impacting my health. I'm working too hard, too long. Sitting at a computer. It's not good for me. I'm doing it now in order to free myself for the future. I'm not committed to doing this for the next 20 years, not in the capacity that I've been doing it now. I'm just saying, I understand that it's impacting my health, and I'm planning a future that does not have me doing this for 30 years. I can work reasonable hours, get away from the computer more, not work at night. And people who are working at gas stations and convenience stores and stuff at night, you don't have to do that. Subway sandwiches, night shift, you do not need to do that. There are plenty of jobs out there. If it's temporary and you're young, sure, but I'm sure the cost to your health is obvious, and the paycheck from a lot of these nighttime jobs is not worth it anyways. For the power plant, it probably is worth it. For the convenience store, it's not. I doubt that it's your only option, and I'm sure most people working those low-level jobs at night are actively seeking something better. And hopefully the importance of sleep gets out there more so that individuals and businesses can make decisions about operating hours that have less of a detrimental effect on their workers. And with all that being said, guys, I do think that that's the episode for today. Remember that you can find everything that I do on my website, notusbooks.org, including all the books that I've written and helped publish, and the free audiobook versions of those books. All of my channels, Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and Rumble, all that stuff is in the description, but you can also find it on my website, notusbooks.org. There's also an archive of this podcast there in case we get taken down again. You can download the episodes there for free. And you can see all of the episodes early on Patreon, at least 1 week early. For just $1.99, you can get all the content on Patreon, not just the podcast episodes, but also our weekly Zoom meeting that I do with the other supplement distributors. And we go pretty deep into specific diseases and products and We always do at least one case study every week. All of that is on Patreon. And regardless if you just want to support, I appreciate it. That link is in the description as well. And that's it for now. I appreciate you once again. Stay healthy, my friends. Until next time.